527. Two Daoists, one old and one young, were walking along the banks of the great lake of the Central Plains. The autumn wind was bleak. The old Daoist told his disciple that he was going to meet an old friend. The young disciple did not ask who it was or whether his cultivation level was high because there was no need to. Back then he was rejected by a scholar on that lonely island in the sea. The young Daoist was a little emotional about his master's cultivation level. Especially when he knew that his master said that the scholar was not a land immortal, nor was he in the unpolished jade realm, immortal realm, or ascendant realm. The young Daoist wanted to comfort his master, but when he saw that his master did not care, the young Daoist gave up. This was even better. His master's ability to slay demons and devils was not good. As a disciple, his Dao was lousy. His master brought him to the Central Plains and went to the Central Plains Mount Longhu. In the end, Zhou Xian was left at the foot of the mountain by his master. The young Daoist was a little regretful, but he felt that his master's reputation was not big enough to bring people up the mountain, so he did not say anything. His master only said that he wanted to ask a favor from those noble people. If it was successful, Zhou Xian could go up the mountain. Zhou Xian asked his master to be more attentive and talk to those noble people nicely. He did not want to mess around like he did on his own mountain. After all, whether he could visit the celestial master's residence depended on his master. The old Daoist said that there was nothing to worry about when his master was doing things. The young Daoist's eyes were full of sorrow. He had been cultivating on Earth Flat Peak for so many years. Master, what did you do? Occasionally there would be some Daoists from other sects who came to talk to you. They were either sleeping soundly or asked him and a few of his senior brothers to help them. Over time, the Daoists from the Taixia, Bai Yun and Xian Finger sects did not talk about anything. When they saw him, they would immediately sigh and leave without hesitation. Although it was natural for a disciple to help his master solve his problems, it was not right for the disciple to help his master every time. Not long after the old Daoist climbed up the mountain, he came down and said that the matter was not successful. It should be because he could not go to the celestial master's residence to broaden his horizons. The young Daoist said that it was fine. He turned around and comforted the old Daoist. The old Daoist was moved to tears and was extremely emotional. He said, "Feng Shan, a disciple like you is truly your master's little jacket." The young Taoist looked up at Mount Longhu in the distance. It was shrouded in immortal qi, the cries of red-crowned cranes and the brilliance of treasures. He was a little disappointed, but this disappointment was not for his master but for himself. Back then he had followed his master's instructions to leave the mountain and not wander around his own mountain. He had gone to a faraway place to enjoy the scenery. Therefore Zhou Xian had taken a ferry to a faraway place. After traveling for a while, he had lost his soul and was unwilling to return to his sect. He gritted his teeth, took out almost all of his immortal coins, and took a ferry to the Aquarius continent. Later he met a friend and then another. The three of them parted, met again and parted again. After the experience, there were some things that the young Daoist was very clear about. Therefore Zhou Xian felt more and more grateful to his master. The old Daoist stopped somewhere by the great swamp and asked him to wait for a moment. Zhou Xian stood at the side with a bamboo box on his back. He asked softly, "Master, you didn't bring any gifts when you visited?" The old Daoist with two fire dragons embroidered on his Daoist robe frowned and said, "I was in a hurry and forgot." Zhou Xian sighed, "Even if it's just a few snowflakes, it's still a gift that counts. Master, are we too careless? The next time you visit a good friend you can tell me in advance. I'll prepare a gift." The old Daoist thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. He held back and did not tell his disciple the truth. "If we brought gifts, I'm afraid that the great swamp water god would misunderstand that we're trying to be polite before resorting to force. His knees would most likely go soft." Although this great swamp water god was the first in the water god temple of the third dynasty in the world, he really did not know how to be a human back then. As a god, his temper was not very good, so he began to use his divine ability to burn the great swamp. After the entire great swamp's water level dropped by more than 10 feet, that fellow finally began to kneel and kowtow, begging for mercy. At this moment the old Daoist who had used a camouflage technique revealed a little of his aura. Very quickly, an old man in a golden robe came out of the water. After he came ashore he did not speak. He did not dare to. His heart was beating like a drum and his face was tense. He was afraid that he would not be able to control himself and kneel down, crying and acting pitiful. He was afraid that if he said some mushy words and made the old Daoist unhappy, wouldn't that be a disaster? If it was said that in this dynasty on the mountain and under the mountain, this water god who was not considered low in terms of rank in cultivation was known to be a tough nut to crack. He had once fought with a few great cultivators who crossed the border. The only exception was when he faced the Jinren of Fire Dragon. A normal great cultivator would at most use spells and magic treasures to break his golden body and hurt his vitality. He could then rely on incense and water to repair his golden body and recover. However, this Jinren of Fire Dragon in front of him could break his golden body into powder and he could not even retaliate. As for why the Jinren of Fire Dragon could casually attack a water god and why the Middle-earth Academy had very few restrictions on this old Daoist, it was a little strange. The young Daoist looked at this person who seemed to be an otherworldly cultivator and then looked at this person who was expressionless and cold. He was a little angry at his master. Look, is there even a little bit of the joyous atmosphere of an old friend reuniting? Could it be that his master felt that he had lost face at Mount Longhu and wanted to come to the Mirage Marsh to find a friend he was not close to and show off that he had many friends in the Middle-earth Divine Continent? Actually, master, you don't have to do this. The young Daoist felt a little sorry for his master. Zhang Shanfeng coughed. Master? The Jinren of Fire Dragon, who was in a daze, acknowledged and smiled. Long time no see. The old man in the golden robe swallowed his saliva and forced a smile. Yes, it has been a long time. The Jinren of Fire Dragon could not be bothered to talk nonsense with this water god. I want a bottle of water pills from you. The old man in the golden robe almost cried on the spot. It was just a bottle of water pills from the Mirage Marsh Water God Palace. It was just a small matter for him to pass a message. Why would he need to come personally? If he took a few more steps on this rural road, wouldn't it delay the old Immortal's cultivation? Old Immortal, do you know that your appearance is going to scare me, this little Immortal, out of my guts, okay? The old man in the golden robe only felt that he had survived a disaster and was going to hold a banquet in the Mirage Marsh Water God Palace. After all, he had been worried for more than 1,000 years. He was always worried that the next time he saw the Jinren of Fire Dragon, even if he did not die, he would lose a layer of skin. He did not expect that a bottle of water pills could settle him. Of course, the so-called bottle of water pills was only for an old immortal who was at the peak of the ascendant realm like the Jinren of Fire Magic. Ordinary immortals who were proficient in fire magic would not dare to ask for such a thing. Anyway, if the other party bullied him and caused a big commotion, the dynasty and the academy would not stand by and do nothing. Hence, the old man in the golden robe immediately took out a porcelain bottle and asked carefully, "One bottle is enough?" The Jinren of Fire Dragon smiled. "What do you think?" The old man in the golden robe immediately took out another bottle of water pills condensed from the essence of the Mirage Marsh Water God. In fact, the Jinren of Fire Dragon only needed one bottle. However, he suddenly thought of the Baiyun lineage on his mountain. Someone might need this item to help them break through the realm. Hence, he did not intend to reject it. Zhang Shanfeng gently pulled his master's sleeve. The Jinren of Fire Dragon smiled. "Your friend gave you such a big gift and treated you sincerely. Although I did give him a gift in the past, in fact, according to my seniority, it was not enough. Hence, I intend to give him another bottle of water pills. I am helping you to return the favor and also to cut off some karma. As for the other bottle, it is for your senior brother from the Baiyun lineage." Zhang Shanfeng did not quite understand what he meant by gift and karma. However, when he thought that Qin Pingon could get another bottle of water pills, it was still a great thing. The Jinren of Fire Dragon did not mind that his disciple and the young man would be together forever. However, there were still some small karma that needed to be sorted out. The Jinren of Fire Dragon took over the 2 bottles of water pills. At the same time, he secretly left a thin fire dragon in the palm of the water god of the Mirage Marsh Water God to help him refine his golden body. After receiving benefits from others, he had to return the favor. Furthermore, regarding Qin Pingon, the Jinren of Fire Dragon did not want to spoil him through excessive enthusiasm. In actual fact, his disciple Zhang Shanfeng, or rather himself, owed him 2 favors. Firstly, it was the seal personally carved by the previous Master of Heaven. It was not expensive, but to Zhang Shanfeng it meant a lot. This was the fate of Dao. To a Daoist, fate of Dao was the most important thing in the world. Magic treasures and celestial weapons were secondary. Secondly, it was the sword. However, this was the other fate of Dao. This was also the reason why the Jinren of Fire Dragon was not willing to vent his anger in the mansion of the Celestial Master after his request failed. According to the agreement, the Jinren of Fire Dragon hoped that his disciple Zhang Shanfeng could receive the approval of the Celestial Master of the mansion of the Celestial Master to inherit the position of a Celestial Master with a different surname. However, the mansion of the Celestial Master acknowledged that Zhang Shanfeng had a bright future. However, they felt that the world was going to be chaotic and that distant water could not quench the present thirst. They asserted that Zhang Shanfeng would not be able to become the mainstay of the Dragon Tiger Mountain in the next 100 years. In addition, the mansion of the Celestial Master had found another 2 candidates for the position of Celestial Master with a different surname. Hence, they did not accept the Jinren of Fire Dragon's suggestion. Hence, as long as the Jinren of Fire Dragon ascended in the North Continent, the Dragon Tiger Mountain of Middle-earth would promote a Celestial Master with a different surname. Although he would be inferior to the Jinren of Fire Dragon, he would still be a far cry from Zhang Shanfeng. At that time, in the Grand Master Hall of the mansion of the Celestial Master, except for the Celestial Master who looked calm, the rest of the nobles were panicking. They were afraid that the Jinren of Fire Dragon would attack them. Luckily, the Jinren of Fire Dragon only went down the mountain silently and brought his disciple Zhang Shanfeng out of the Dragon Tiger Mountain. At the shore of the Great Lake, the golden-robed old man was in a frenzy. Just as he was about to kowtow to express his gratitude, the Jinren of Fire Dragon signaled him not to do so. The golden-robed old man quickly calmed himself down. Zhang Shanfeng took the 2 bottles of water pills from the Jinren of Fire Dragon and kept them in his sleeves. He could finally do something for Qin Pingon, right? Not only did he freeload on Qin Pingon, he also owed a lot of debts. At the haunted house in the Tsai country, he bought the dew armor on credit. At the ferry in the Shu Shui country, he bought the sword on credit. Later on, when he and Su Yuanxia were trapped in the Qingwan country, it was Qin Pingon who saved him. The Jinren of Fire Dragon glanced at the golden-robed old man. The latter immediately understood and gritted his teeth. He took out the last bottle of water pills and gave it to the young Daoist. Just a cultivator of the lower 5 realms? Is he really the disciple of the Jinren of Fire Dragon? Although the Jinren of Fire Dragon had a weird temper and he never took in disciples based on their potential, since the old Immortal was willing to travel the central divine continent with a disciple, how could this disciple be simple? The young Daoist was a little embarrassed. He wanted the bottle of water pills but felt that it was not very generous. Hence, he rejected it verbally. The golden-robed old man said shamelessly that the water pills were the most worthless thing in his family. Since it was the first time both of them met and he was a few years older, he should give a gift. He did not dare to say that he was a senior who was a few years older. If he was the senior of the young Daoist, wouldn't he be of the same generation as the Jinren of Fire Dragon? Zhang Shanfeng had actually decided not to accept it. However, the Jinren of Fire Dragon persuaded him to accept it. He said that if he had the chance to travel the central divine continent alone in the future, he could return the gift. Regarding the word return the gift, the golden-robed water deity's scalp went numb and he was terrified. He guessed that the Jinren of Fire Dragon was related to the Dragon Tiger Mountain. This was because in the 1,000 years after the Jinren of Fire Dragon burned the Great Swamp and returned to the North Continent, there would often be nobles from the Celestial Master's residence who would come down the mountain to visit the battlefield. Only then did Zhang Shanfeng accept the 3rd bottle of water pills and thank him. The golden-robed old man did not dare to stay any longer and left. He had to make use of the fire dragon given by the old deity to cultivate his golden body. Before that, of course, he had to pass down the order for all the lake spirits in his territory to return to their lair immediately. If anyone dared to not control their legs, he, the water deity of the Mirage Marsh, would not be able to carry his own head. The Jinren of Fire Dragon brought Zhang Shanfeng along and continued to travel on foot. The Jinren of Fire Dragon's words were harsh and he did not say much to his disciple Zhang Shanfeng. The karma between Qin Pingon and the North Continent was very deep and it would be easy for his disciple to get involved. He believed that with the young man's temperament, even if he was in a desperate situation, he would not take the initiative to get Zhang Shanfeng involved. However, the world was a mess. Since Qin Pingon had done so, his disciple would have his own ideas and would definitely join in without hesitation. When that time came, would he, as the master, allow the sword immortals of the North Continent to go out to sea and fight against the celestial master's residence of the Dragon Tiger Mountain? Or would he break the rules and go down the mountain to help his disciple and the young man? He had to admit that many of the fundamentals of Tao that Lu Qin advocated were actually very disgraceful at first glance. It sounded very harsh at first, but after 100 or 1,000 years, it would become the truth. When one cultivates on the mountain, everyone cultivates themselves. When one travels through the void, one can either ascend or reincarnate. Naturally, the mountain would be peaceful and the world would be peaceful. Once the cultivators on the mountain decided the fate of the people below the mountain based on their personal preferences, coupled with the knowledge of the 100 schools of thought, everything would become even messier. Everyone was reasonable and everyone was unreasonable. The fiery dragon Zhenren had once been to the Qingming Tian in his early years due to fate. He saw the good and bad of the Daoist school of the world that was not sloppy, and he also saw the good and bad of the Confucian school of the world that was condensed into a web of human relationships. Indeed, the Qingming Tian school of Taoism used the Baek-o-Kaikyung building to fight against the illusory otherworldly demons and used the Great Wall of Sword Aura and the Inverted Mountain to fight against the barren world. The young Daoist suddenly laughed. Master, now that I have traversed the Middle Plains divine continent, I am like Qin Pingon, someone who has traversed the 3 continents. The fiery dragon Zhenren laughed and nodded. Both of you are very impressive. Zhang Shanfeng asked, are the Qi cultivators of the younger generation of the Aquarius continent slightly inferior to us? The fiery dragon Zhenren said, the difference in age between the 2 continents is only 60 years. Perhaps in the future, everyone will realize that the youths of the Aquarius continent are becoming more and more outstanding. But then again, the fate of a continent is fixed, but the amount of spiritual energy is not. Whichever continent is bigger, the number of youths in their age will be even more exaggerated. Hence, for the Aquarius continent to impress the other 8 continents, they still need some luck. From the looks of it, Master's old friend Li Lu will definitely be outstanding. This is something that no one can stop. Ma Kushuan is also a person who is blessed by the heavens, and the lady that he is assisting is not an exception. These 3 in comparison are the least unexpected. That is why Master will pick them out to talk about. But just because they are less unexpected does not mean that there are no surprises. Zhang Shanfeng laughed. Qin Pingon will definitely be outstanding, right? The fiery dragon Zhenren nodded. He should be one. But the final height, it is still hard to say, because there are too many variables. Zhang Shanfeng said, Master, my foresight is not bad, right? The first friend that I made in the Aquarius continent was Qin Pingon. The fiery dragon Zhenren said, I feel that Qin Pingon's foresight is not bad too. Zhang Shanfeng thought for a while. Qin Pingon's foresight in making friends is not bad. But Master, your foresight in taking in disciples is neither good nor bad. After all, some of the senior brothers and sisters that came from the ground-bending peak are still very powerful. The fiery dragon Zhenren was silent for a while, then smiled. Shanfeng, remember one thing. Zhang Shanfeng asked curiously, Master, please tell me. The old Zhenren sighed. In the future you will also take in disciples and teach them Taoist techniques. Remember, don't fall in love with these disciples just because you think that they will definitely become the person at the top of the mountain. Rather, these disciples have a lot of, well, maybe even their masters are not as good as them. That's why they are destined to have more chances to reach the top of the mountain. Don't get the order of things wrong. Aptitude was never absolute. Everything is beautiful and there is nothing unique about the scenery. Many of the ancestors of the immortal sects cultivated till their brains became rusty, and could not understand such a small matter. That is why the peak of a mountain did not have the slightest bit of human feeling. The old man turned his head and saw his disciple holding back his laughter and asked, What's wrong? Zhang Shanfeng laughed. Master, with my current skills, how can I take in disciples? Wouldn't I be leading them astray? The old man laughed. Take it slow, there is no rush. The so-called Tao technique inheritance was passed down from generation to generation. It might not be a big deal, but it was nothing more than someone lighting up a light. Although the light was thin, it could help the person behind to light up a light in the dark. Otherwise, the world would be forever dark. Tao begets one. 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, and 3 begets all things. Xianfeng, do you want to take a ride on the Qiangyao Sect's celestial ferry? Cross the continent and travel to the south. The scenery along the way is quite good. Master, let's not puff ourselves up at our own cost, shall we? But there is a good friend over there who invited you over as a guest. It is hard to refuse. Then I feel that this friend of yours is most likely not on good terms with you. Otherwise, how could he not know that you are short of money? Oh Xianxia, if you really can't do it, then I'll have to make you suffer a little. Master's ability to slay demons and devils is indeed a little lacking. However, Master's earth shrinking technique is still passable. You've experienced it yourself. Then let's take the cross-continent ferry. Money is just a worldly possession. Before I board the ferry, I will prepare some dry food and pickles. Why did I accept such a clever disciple like you? Master has good taste. Makes sense. Master, this time we are guests, we should prepare a gift, right? After all, we are not cultivating on our own mountain, we still have to pay attention to etiquette. He is a scholar, let's just buy a few books from a roadside stall, he is easy to deal with. A scholar again? Don't be rejected again. Xianfeng, I have to tell you the truth. In fact, my Dao technique and name still have some face outside of my own mountain. Then why is that senior not willing to invite us to his residence? He should have treated us to a cup of tea. I always felt that the senior was actually very polite. Even though he clearly didn't want to see us, he was still very courteous. I'm not unfamiliar with this kind of situation. Back then, when I left Earth-lying Peak to travel around the foot of the mountain, I saw quite a few rich families with evil spirits lingering around them. I wanted to help them, so after I knocked on their door and explained the situation, they didn't chase me away. They just threw me a handful of copper coins or a few pieces of silver. I see. Master, don't always sleep on the mountain. Walk down the mountain more often. I have also learned these superficial ways of the world from my experiences at the foot of the mountain. Xianfeng, when you were descending the mountain, did you meet an old man? I heard that you had a good chat. Yes, that senior said that he is an old friend of yours, so he came up the mountain to ask. I gave him directions and chatted for a while. After that, he seemed to be very happy. Venerable Fiery Dragon nodded and did not say much. After a 12th realm sword Immortal left ground flat peak, he spread the news like a gossipy woman. How could he not be happy? When he returned to the North Continent, he would make a trip to that fellow's sect and make him happy again. He would be full in one go. However, Venerable Fiery Dragon was a little sad. No matter how high his cultivation was, he still felt the sadness of parting. He might not be able to return. A broken sword could be returned, but he might not. Outside the inverted mountain at the Great Wall of Sword Aura. Sword Aura rushed to the sky. In the vast world, chickens were crowing and dogs were barking. Smoke was rising from the chimneys. There were 3 continents that could lose everything in the blink of an eye. In the end, Zhang Shanfeng said for no reason, Master, although your Dao technique is not high, I feel that you are the best master in the world. The old perfected person smiled and said, That's right. The way you choose your disciples and the way I choose my master is not bad. Zhang Shanfeng said casually, Master, when I have a Dao technique like yours, will I be considered a small success in cultivation? The old perfected person smiled and said, Yes. All the Dao techniques in the world came from one person? After a moment of silence, the old perfected person smiled and said softly, The immeasurable heavenly venerable for blessings. It was summer. At the Dragon Rider Alley shop, only Shiro was left to look after the shop. Pei Qian had already left the school. Zhu Lian nodded and agreed, so Shiro did not say anything. Once Pei Qian left, Zhou Mili followed him to Luopa Mountain. From a bustling place to a deserted place, Shiro was not used to it. Wei Pai often came to Luopa Mountain secretly. Zheng Dafeng also often left the mansion that he built at the foot of the mountain and came to Zhu Lian's place. The Lotus Flower Blessed Land was divided into 4, and Luopa Mountain occupied one of them. Of course it was a good thing, but it was also troublesome. That was, if any blessed land wanted to maintain the stability of the world, it needed to eat money, a lot of immortal money. Especially if one wanted to upgrade from a low-level blessed land with poor spiritual energy to a mid-level blessed land that could allow the locals of the blessed land to cultivate, it needed the person in charge of the blessed land to continuously consume the immortal money. Simply speaking, it was a bottomless pit. But if it was managed well, it would be like the Cloud Cave blessed land controlled by the Jiang family of the Jade Gui sect in the Tongya continent. At first, the blessed land was allowed to swallow the immortal money like a whale. Eventually, it was promoted to a high-class blessed land and formed a relatively stable pattern. Gods from all sides could help stabilize the spiritual energy of the mountains and rivers, as well as the cultivation sects that gathered the spiritual energy on the mountains of the major immortals. Not only did it not destroy the Jiang family's wealth, but it also made a lot of money and finally supported the Jiang family. The local cultivators of the blessed land, as well as the various heavenly materials and earthly treasures that were gradually nurtured by the spiritual energy, were all sources of wealth. Recently Wei Pai, Zhou Xian and Jing Dafeng were discussing this matter. They were discussing how to manage this small territory that was temporarily named Lotus Flower Blessed Land. The real name of course still needed to wait for Qin Pingon to come back. The territory of this small blessed land was the territory of the Nanyuan Kingdom of the former Lotus Flower Blessed Land. The population was a total of 20 million people. When the Lotus Flower Blessed Land was obtained by Luopa Mountain, it was already filled with spiritual energy. It was between a low-level and mid-level blessed land. This meant that all living beings in the Nanyuan Kingdom, whether it was humans or plants, had hope of cultivation. But the crux of the problem was that as long as it was not a mid-level blessed land, even if the Nanyuan Kingdom Emperor and the imperial court conferred the title of God of Mountains and Rivers, they still could not retain the spiritual energy. The spiritual energy of this blessed land would dissipate without a trace. Even a mountain god like Wei Pai could not find a trace of the spiritual energy, let alone stop the spiritual energy from slowly flowing out. Therefore, the most important thing was how to spend money to upgrade the Lotus Flower Blessed Land to a mid-level blessed land. But how to spend money and where to spend it was a great knowledge. It was not something that could be done by just throwing a lot of money. If it was done well, 1 grain of grain rain money might be able to retain the spiritual energy of 9 grains of small heat money. If it was done poorly, it might be lucky to retain the spiritual energy of 4 or 5 grains of small heat money. Usually it was fine, but when it came to this kind of thing, the lack of wealth of Luopa Mountain was suddenly highlighted. It was even more obvious than when they were building the mountain protecting formation of Luopa Mountain. Before how to spend a lot of money, there was another problem. How to borrow money, who to borrow money from, and how much money to borrow. After these 2 problems were confirmed, it was how to sign a contract with the Emperor of the Nanyuan Kingdom and Zhongqiu, and then how to secretly place the immortal spiritual weapons and magic weapons, and a series of trivial matters such as the distribution of cultivation manuals. After that, it was to teach the Nanyuan Kingdom's imperial court a set of etiquette and ceremony for the gods of mountains and rivers, and how to get benefits from the Lotus Flower Blessed Land, to ensure that it would not drain the pond to catch fish, and to make a mid-level blessed land have the hope of being promoted to a high-level blessed land. In the future, there would be a group of earth immortal cultivators who could be recruited by the Luopa Mountain. This required the Luopa Mountain to be forced to act as the god, to set the meticulous rules for the Lotus Flower Blessed Land. Zhou Xian, Jing Dafeng and Wei Pai each took out a detailed charter, and then checked each other's mistakes and filled in the gaps. Later, Zhou Xian took the initiative to send a letter to Liu Baixiang, asking him to start accumulating immortal money while drawing in the forces. As for Wei Xian's letter, he only needed to send it to Cui Dongshan. In fact, in the end it was still sent to Cui Dongshan. Anyway, he was his young master's disciple and student, so there was no need to be polite. The letter from Yu Guizong Sui used a cross-continent flying sword that consumed a lot of gold. Zhou Xian couldn't help but curse. He wanted that Sui Yu to not delay his own cultivation, but to remember to have a conscience and to take a few magic weapons back to his family. Wei Pai was a businessman. He was willing to borrow money from the various forces that the Dali imperial court was relatively familiar with, but the dividends from the Lotus Flower Blessed Land after it became a medium-level blessed land were the same as the dividends from the Oxhorn Mountain Ferry. Zhou Xian thus began to turn hostile, insisting on one thing. Other than Wei Pai having to take out enough Guyu money, Wei Pai, could only take 10% of the profits from the Lotus Flower Blessed Land, and not the 20% that Wei Pai himself proposed. Not only that, Zhou Xian also wanted to add a time limit, 1,000 years. After that, if Wei Pai still wanted a share, he would have to take out additional Guyu money. As for the specific amount, it could be discussed at a later time. Jing Dafeng, of course, was on Zhou Lian's side. Wei Pai, while borrowing money wantonly through his own secret channels, was slowly grinding with these two guys. Zhou Xian and Jing Dafeng didn't say anything about Wei Pai's actions. Wei Pai naturally knew how to act appropriately. After Cui Dongshan received the secret letter, the three of them were the same. No matter how much immortal money this person was willing to take out, they absolutely wouldn't allow him to participate in the matter of sharing. Even if Cui Dongshan used the name of borrowing money to deal with Luopa Mountain, there was no problem. On this day the three of them met again and sat in Zhou Lian's courtyard. Wei Bian sighed and said slowly, "The results are out. At the very least we will need to spend 2,000 grain rain coins, and at most 3,000 grain rain coins, and we will barely be able to rank as a medium-grade blessed land. The longer it is delayed, the greater the consumption." Zhou Lian said, "Old Dragon City's Fan family and Sun family's replies have not been received yet. According to the conclusion of the three of them, if these two families were willing to lend money to Luopa Mountain, it would be best to add interest, and Luopa Mountain would return the money to them according to the agreement. However, if the two families were willing to each pay a large amount of Guyu money, they could share 10% of the Blessed Land's income, or Luopa Mountain could slowly return the money with 5% of the income and half of the interest-free principal repayment." However, the three of them were also prepared for the worst. Both families felt that the income was too small or too slow, so they tactfully refused Luopa Mountain. Wan Qi had now returned to Longquan County from a new mountain in Dali, but as a neighbor the three of them didn't even think about it. No one would open their mouth because it was not suitable for the two sides to be involved too deeply. After all, Qin Pingon was the true master of Luopa Mountain. All kinds of plans still needed to consider Qin Pingon's situation first. Jing Dafeng laughed. "Why don't we just let Wei Pai hold another night party? A mosquito's leg is still meat. After 2 days, when he reaches the unpolished Jade Realm, he'll hold another one. This will be 2 mosquitoes' legs." Wei Pai said helplessly, "So shameless, it's not appropriate, is it?" Jing Dafeng turned his head to Zhou Lian and laughed. "Do you think it's appropriate?" Zhou Lian said seriously, "I think it's quite appropriate." Wei Pai laughed. "Fine, then I'll hold another one and collect another batch of divine money and various spiritual weapons." Jing Dafeng said, "But when the time comes, Oxhorn Mountain will reopen the shop and sell those gifts at a high price. I think it's really shameless." Zhou Lian chuckled. "I'll sell it. I'll just be the shopkeeper. There's no need for Mountain God Wei to appear, so what's there to be afraid of? At worst, I'll let Mount Biyun spread the word that a thief stole everything from Mountain God Wei's house." Wei Pai rubbed his eyebrows. "It's better to open the shop before the Xianxia night party. Since I'm already shameless, I might as well let them know that I'm short of money." Jing Dafeng clicked his tongue and said, "Killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Let people mistakenly think that you need the immortal money to help increase your chances of breaking through. This second night banquet is very meaningful. The ceremony of the mountain worshipping might not be much worse than the first." Zhou Lian and Jing Dafeng looked at each other and smiled. Then the three began to think about the details of upgrading a mid-level blessed land. After Zhou Lian and Pei Qian entered the Lotus Blossom Blessed Land, Nanyuan Kingdom, last time Zhou Lian went there alone again. The opening and closing of a blessed land was not a casual matter. The loss of spiritual energy was great and could easily damage the Lotus Blossom Blessed Land. Therefore, every time he entered a new blessed land he had to be very careful. Zhou Lian went to find the imperial tutor Zhong Qiu. Under Zhong Qiu's recommendation he met the emperor of Nanyuan Kingdom. The conversation was not pleasant, but it was not too stiff. Later Zhong Qiu gave the finishing touch. He seemed to be asking about Zhou Lian's identity, whether he was the legendary noble young master Zhou Lian. Zhou Lian did not admit or deny. The emperor of Nanyuan Kingdom's face and eyes changed on the spot, reducing some of his hesitation. Zhou Lian was now the banished immortal. Of course, the emperor of Nanyuan Kingdom was afraid. But if this banished immortal who fell from the sky was Zhou Lian, the emperor of Nanyuan Kingdom was only afraid. It was very simple. In history, which martial madman killed 9 people and the other 9 grandmasters? The battlefield was in the capital of Nanyuan Kingdom. Who would not be afraid of doing business with such a person? In the end, Zhou Lian casually said to the emperor of Nanyuan Kingdom, "No matter how strong you are, there is a method of immortality out there. Your Lotus Blossom Blessed Land cannot compare. So many emperors who cultivated immortality died because they did not know the method. Therefore the emperor's eyes changed from fear to fervor. Although the imperial tutor Zhou Xian was worried, he did not say anything at that time. After the three people in the small courtyard talked about this important matter, there was another important matter. The matter of Pei Qian practicing martial arts. Howl, howl and cry. On the second floor it was like this almost every day. Wei Pai was a little worried that Qin Pingan's temperament would change. When Qin Pingan returned to Luopa Mountain, who would bear the responsibility? Zheng Dafeng said that he was the gatekeeper at the foot of the mountain. Of course it was Zhu Lian the housekeeper. Zhu Lian said that he could not bear the responsibility and should let Senior Cui Qing of Bamboo House do it. Wei Pai was a little speechless. Wei Pai hesitated for a long time and said, "If Qin Pingan really gets angry, I will hide in Cloud Mountain. Where will you two go?" Zheng Dafeng looked at Zhu Lian. "I will stay away from Bamboo House." Zhu Lian smiled. "Okay, there won't be a big problem. If there really is, no one can stop it. Maybe it will be better if my young master is on the mountain. But since he is not, things will inevitably happen. We can only wait and see." Wei Pai had a headache and left. Zheng Dafeng thought for a while and went down the mountain to the small town. He went to the Yang family shop not to borrow money, but to ask about some things to pay attention to in managing the blessed land. The old man who was smoking did not answer those trivial matters. He just sneered, "Do you really think Luopa Mountain is your home?" The hunchbacked man smiled. "I think it's quite good." Old Yang said, "Send a letter to Lion Peak in North Continent for these trivial matters. Li Lu will tell you." Zheng Dafeng nodded. Zheng Dafeng asked, "Can I use the true energy talisman on others?" Old Yang said, "Up to you." Zheng Dafeng got up and left. In the shop in front, the hunchbacked man leaned on the counter and said a few words to the junior sister, making the junior brother so sullen that he wanted to hit someone. On Luopa Mountain. At dawn one day, the tanned girl who should have been able to go to the second floor of Bamboo House ran all the way to the foot of Luopa Mountain. She sat on the steps and secretly wiped her tears. If she took another step, she would leave Luopa Mountain. So she sat there in a daze. And she knew that if she was late to Bamboo House, she would only suffer more. She slowly got up and planned to climb the mountain. But she found old chef sitting on the steps behind her. Pei Qian held the mountain staff and said angrily, "Old chef, are you afraid that I will secretly run back to the shop in Dragon Riding Alley? Am I that kind of coward?" Zhu Lian shook his head and said, "I don't think there's anything wrong with you running back to Dragon Riding Alley." Pei Qian sat back on the ground and placed the mountain staff horizontally. Then she crossed her arms in anger. Zhu Lian sat on the steps behind and said with a smile, "If you're afraid that young master will be disappointed, I don't think there's a need. Your master will not be disappointed or angry with you just because you gave up halfway through the fist technique. Don't worry, I won't lie to you. Only if you slack off and delay copying the book will he be disappointed." Pei Qian's tears gushed out of her eyes. Every time Qin Rushu carried her out of Bamboo House and she woke up from the medicine bucket, she wanted to copy the book no matter what. But her soul and body trembled. How could her hands not tremble? During this period of time, no matter how hard she clenched her teeth and persevered, no matter how many methods she used, such as tying her hand and pen together, she still could not write a word properly. She had accumulated a lot of debt. Zhu Lian said to the slender figure, "But there are two kinds of slack. Slack in the state of mind is scarier. If you can make up for your debt one day while practicing the fist technique, then it's not really slack. Your master will think that you're doing the right thing. Because your master always thinks that everyone has things that they can't do well. It's not a fault if you have the will but not the strength. When you have the will and the strength, you can make up for your debt one by one. It's even rarer." Pei Qian wiped her face, got up silently and ran up the mountain. Zhu Lian sat on the spot and turned to look. One day Zhu Lian was cooking in the kitchen. He was not as attentive as he usually was. Today he had carefully prepared many seasonal dishes. Because at the door stood a tanned girl on the verge of collapse. Her arms hung limply and her face was pale. She wobbled all the way here and said that she was hungry today. Therefore Zhu Lian planned to reward this charcoal girl's 5 viscera temple. Then Tsin Yuanji said that there was a guest visiting Luopa Mountain. He came from Old Dragon City and called himself Sun Jiashu. Zhu Lian was wearing an apron and said, "Oh." He only said to let the Sun family's head wait first. If it really didn't work, he would shout Wei Pai's name a few times and let this guy entertain the other party first. Pei Qian said, "Old chef, you go do the important things. I've already cooked a few dishes. It's enough. I'll let Mealy serve the table later." In the courtyard, the little water monster who helped Pei Qian carry the mountain staff immediately straightened her back and said loudly, "Zhou Mealy, temporarily the right protector of Dragon Rider Alley's Sui shop, received the order." Pei Qian nodded, turned his head and said with a straight face, "If you do well when my master comes home, I'll put in some good words for you to be promoted to the right protector of Luopa Mountain. There's also a chance." Zhou Mealy puffed out her chest and grinned, but she quickly closed her mouth. But in the kitchen, Zhu Lian didn't even turn his head. "I think what I'm busy with now is important." Pei Qian hesitated for a moment. "Old chef, you should go see that person. You've cooked so many dishes. What if you can't finish them?" Zhou Mealy was about to say something righteous, but Pei Qian turned his head and glared at her. Zhou Mealy immediately said loudly, "I'm not hungry today." Zhu Lian put down the spatula, untied his apron and left the kitchen and the courtyard. In the main room, Pei Qian asked Zhou Mealy to bring the dishes to the main table one by one. But what made Zhou Mealy strange was that Pei Qian also asked her to bring an extra set of chopsticks and put it on the main seat facing the door. Zhou Mealy took a big bowl, filled it with rice and sat on a bench with Pei Qian. Because Zhou Mealy needed to help Pei Qian with chopsticks and feed him, it was a common thing recently. As the right protector, she was often needed to make contributions. Pei Qian said that Zhou Mealy would record all the things that Zhou Mealy did in the Book of Merits. When the master returned home, it would be the time to reward her according to her merits. Every time Zhou Mealy fed Pei Qian a mouthful of rice, she wolfed it down. Then when she looked up, she saw Pei Qian looking at the empty seat where the bowl and chopsticks were placed quietly. Then Pei Qian looked away and seemed to be a little happy. He shook his head and shoulders and told Zhou Mealy to give him another small bowl of rice. She had to eat more today. When she was full, she could eat more tomorrow. After Zhou Mealy got up, she took the empty bowl and went to the rice bucket on the small stool beside her to get more rice. When her back was to Pei Qian, the little water monster secretly wiped her face and sniffed. He was not really stupid. She didn't know that every time Pei Qian ate a mouthful of rice, he would feel pain all over his body. It was the 5th day of May. People who practice Taoism should enter the famous mountains. Qin Pingon met a pair of scholars and study boys deep in the mountains of Fuxiu Kingdom. They were two ordinary people. The scholar failed in the imperial examination, so he read some strange stories and the writings of scholars. He heard that the masters of Taoism all disappeared in the secluded mountains, so he wanted to find one or two of them to see if he could learn some immortal spells. He always felt that it was easier than passing the imperial examination and returning home in glory. Therefore he worked hard to find ancient temples and Taoist temples and old men in the mountains. He suffered a lot along the way. When Qin Pingon met them on a mountain path, the young scholar and the young study boy were already yellow and thin, and their stomachs were rumbling with hunger. Under the hot sun, the young scholar was fishing in a stream. The young scholar hid under the shade of a tree to enjoy the cool air. Every now and then he would ask if he had caught anything. The young scholar was miserable and unhappy and he only said no. At that time, Qin Pingon was lying on the branch of an ancient pine tree. He closed his eyes and rested his mind. At the same time he practiced the sword furnace stance and Xianxia sleeping stance. In the end, the young scholar finally touched a thorny ant Huang. He was overjoyed. He held the fish with both hands and said loudly that it was a big one. He was so excited that he wanted to claim credit from his master. In the end, his hands were pierced by the thorns and he ran away. The young scholar threw away a wild banana leaf that was used as a fan. He originally wanted to take a look at the big fish, but the young study boy sat in the stream and cried loudly. The young scholar sighed and told him not to worry. He comforted him by saying that he was lucky to get it, but if he didn't, it was his fate. Unexpectedly, the young study boy heard this and cried even harder. The young scholar was so worried that he squatted by the stream and scratched his head. Qin Pingon then took out the bamboo box and carried it on his back. He held a brand new bamboo mountain walking stick in his hand and floated down the mountain path. He walked slowly. After accidentally encountering the scholar and the young man, he took off his bamboo chest, rolled up his trouser legs and sleeves, and without saying anything he went down the stream and found a place where there were a lot of fish. Then he began to move the stones close to the stream and built a dam upstream. Moving horizontally, vertically and horizontally, he began to catch fish in his own territory, which was as shallow as a palm's width. Very soon quite a number of huanggupa and boat nails were thrown ashore. The young man's eyes lit up. According to the young master's words in the Jianghu, this was called enlightenment. Being imbued with 60 years' worth of power by a martial arts senior who had taken a fancy to him. On the mountain, it was like being supported by an immortal who taught him the art of immortality. The young man forgot about the burning pain in his hand. He imitated Chen Pingan's example and carried stones to scoop water. Sure enough, he gained something. They were all small fish in the wild stream whose names he did not know. Although they could not be compared to that senior, they were more than enough to make lunch with his master. However, as soon as they thought about how they were going to make a fire to cook the fish, the young scholar and the young man began to stare at each other. If the route was correct, they were still more than 100 li away from the nearest county town. They really had not seen smoke for a long time. At the beginning of their journey, they felt that the extremely annoying sounds of roosters crowing and dogs barking in the countryside and villages. Now they really missed it. Fortunately, the young man in green, who did not look like a bad person at all, taught the young man a unique skill. He picked a few green foxtails and skewered the fish that had been dissected and cleaned. Then he put them on a big rock by the stream and exposed them to the sun. The young man did not care. He applied what he had learned. After cleaning the fish, which were as big as his palm and as small as his pinky finger, he put them one by one on the hot rock by the stream. The scholar introduced himself. He was from Lujiao County in Fuziu country. His surname was Liu and his name was Dun. He invited the young man in green to rest under the shade of a tree. The young servant squatted on the side and looked at the dozens of fish lying on the rocks not far away. He was secretly happy. The young man said his surname was Qin. He came from a small country in the south and had traveled all the way here. Lu Dun chatted with him mainly because he hoped to be able to travel together with this young Master Qin to his hometown in Lujiao County. Otherwise, he would already be embarrassingly short of money, with only 500 to 600 miles left. How was he going to travel? In fact, on the way back home, there were two local influential families that had been friends with his family for generations. He could borrow some money, but he was too embarrassed to ask. Especially the family that was closer to his hometown. They had people of the same age who were famous on the apricot roll in this year's imperial examination. It would be embarrassing if he visited them like a beggar. As for the other family, there was a beautiful lady in that family. She was elegant and quiet. She was famous for being a beauty. He was even more embarrassed to go. Qin Pingon took out some dry food from the bamboo box and handed it to the master and servant. After the young scholar expressed his gratitude, he did not stand on ceremony and gave half to the young servant. The three of them ate the dry food together. Qin Pingon said that the dried fish in the stream could be eaten directly. Could be considered to be filling. The scholar and the young servant were suddenly enlightened. The young scholar was a scholar after all. He said that he had once seen a similar record in a book called Western Border Miscellaneous Records. It said that the scorching sun was terrible. Try to stick the flatbread on the brick wall and it was cooked in a short time. The young servant was very proud. His young master was naturally very knowledgeable. Qin Pingon patiently listened to the young scholar's explanation. When he was chewing and swallowing slowly, he was also thinking about some things. The Green Oriole Kingdom bought a set of 24 solar terms Guyu invitation at Longdu. There were a lot of them, but they were not expensive. 12 snowflakes cost money. The expensive one was the Guyu card, which cost 48 snowflakes. In order to bargain for 2 snowflakes, Qin Pingon spent a lot of effort at that time. He bought 3 bamboo cricket cages in the Jingnan Kingdom where cricket fighting was popular. He planned to give them to Pei Qian and Zhou Mili. Of course, he did not forget the girl in pink, Chen Rushu. The 3 small porcelain pots in the Lanfang Kingdom could be used to plant small green pines and orchids. The bonsai in the Lanfang Kingdom was the best in the territory of more than 10 countries. It was also a pot for 3 people. However, even if they planted flowers and plants, Pei Qian and Zhou Mili would let Chen Rushu take care of them. Soon they would not have the patience to water them every day and move them in and out often. There was an incense burner made by the previous dynasty in the Jinfei Kingdom. There was also a skillful hollow golden ball. It was nested in order from big to small. There were as many as 9 balls. In the end, Qin Pingon did not agree to go with the young scholar. But in the end he gave them his brook fishes and some fish hooks and fishing lines. After the two of them thanked him again, they continued on their way. Qin Pingon sat by the stream in the mountain and began to breathe. After so many years of traveling, Qin Pingon had met many people and also admired many people. But there was one person who, during the most difficult trip to the Bookslip Lake, seemed to be very inconspicuous. She was just a small passerby on the muddy road of the human world. But Qin Pingon still remembered her clearly. That was an old woman from the countryside who had a rough life. At that time Qin Pingon took Zheng Yi and Ma Duyi to repay the debt. Near the stream in the village, Qin Pingon saw a poor old woman with a crooked figure. Her clothes were clean. Even if it was mended, there was still a sense of dilapidation. The old woman had just finished washing her clothes by the stream. She walked back home with a large bamboo basket. Then she saw the ghost that her grandson had turned into after his death. It possessed Zheng Ye's body and ran to the old woman's side, kowtowing with all its might. The old woman hurriedly put the bamboo basket full of clean clothes on the muddy ground and squatted down to try to help the strange young man that she could not recognize. That scene. It could be remembered by Qin Pingon for a lifetime. It could even be said that for Qin Pingon she was like a very small but very warm light in the Bookslip Lake where he could not even see his fingers. Qin Pingon clearly felt the power of 2 words from the old woman for the first time. Come. It was as if all the invisible rules and sufferings of the world were not worth mentioning when they landed on the old woman's body. The world was divided into the top of the mountain and the bottom of the mountain. There was also the difference between rich and poor. But the weight of suffering was not necessarily the same. When it fell on everyone's head, if someone heard a word of suffering, it could be the pain of someone else being stabbed. It was very difficult to use reason to explain anything. It was just the same kind of suffering. Only the word calm was unchangeable throughout the ages. Qin Pingon suddenly opened his eyes. He was actually forced to withdraw from the inner vision of a cultivator. His mind was greatly moved. But it was definitely not the chaotic scene of a martial artist going mad. He only felt his sleeves bulging. Qin Pingon was actually completely unable to restrain his fist intent. 2 places in his heart were like God's beating drums, shaking endlessly. Qin Pingon stood up. His body staggered and he stepped into the stream. Then he gritted his teeth and stood still, 1 foot in the mountain and 1 foot in the water. When the drum sounded, the fire dragon in the Qi mansion acupoint in his body swam. It was like a series of spring thunder vibrating, naturally exploding in the small world of the human body. After the drum stopped, Qin Pingon had a heroic courage. (528) Saint Ruanchong, who had disappeared for a long time, finally returned home. He first went to the shop by the Dragon Whisker River and met his disciple Su Xiaoqiao. Then, before going to the mountain of the Dragon Spring Sword sect, he threw out the 2 demons that were attached to the Immortal mansion in the west but did not follow the rules out of the land. Only then did Ruanchong return to his own mountain. The 12 disciples who were accepted after Donggu and Su Xiaoqiao were called together by second senior brother Donggu and asked them to practice their sword skills one by one. Ruanchong was expressionless and did not give any specific swordsmanship to this group of registered disciples. He sat on the bench and after watching he got up to forge a sword. This made the group of high-spirited nominal disciples feel uneasy. The eldest senior sister who liked to wear green clothes did not show up from the beginning to the end. 4th senior brother Xieling was present. He sighed and returned to his house to continue cultivating. As soon as Ruanchong appeared, there were people rushing to the Dragon Spring Sword sect, hoping to be favored by this immortal. There were young disciples who were escorted by the noble families of Dali, young boys and girls who came alone, and many wild cultivators who hoped to become guests on the mountain. There were all kinds of people. This made Ruanchong's nominal eldest disciple, Donggu, a little annoyed. Donggu had to be the master of the 12 juniors who had not recorded the ancestral hall's pedigree for the time being. He also had to take care of the affairs of the sect. Moreover, the 12 of them had been cultivating in the Dragon Spring Sword sect for a period of time. Their aptitude and talent were about the same. Their human nature gradually revealed. Some of them admitted that their talent in swordsmanship was not as good as others. so they were distracted by interpersonal relationships. Some of them immersed themselves in training but could not make progress in swordsmanship. Some of them were respectful and modest on the mountain but liked to call themselves disciples of the sword sect when they went down the mountain. There was also the innate sword embryo who was far better than his peers. He had privately asked Donggu to learn another superior swordsmanship of the Wind Snow Temple. As for the immortal sects that built mansions in the western mountains, many of them visited the Divine Grace Mountain. Naturally, Donggu still had to come out and build a relationship. It was a very energy-consuming thing. Eldest senior sister Wuxia would definitely not pay attention to it. Junior sister Xianxia was cold and naturally did not like to socialize. Xialing was naturally unwilling to smile and say good things to others. If it were not for the fact that the Dragon Spring Sword sect did not need to worry about money, Donggu would have wanted to take the initiative to ask Master Wan Chong to open a peak, so that he could cultivate in seclusion. Donggu had set a rule for himself that he had to reach the nascent soul stage within 100 years. After all, he was different from Su Xiaoqiao, who was one of the sword cultivators of the Wind Snow Temple. Although Donggu was the first disciple of the Dragon Spring Sword sect, he was not a sword cultivator, which was against the rules. Wanju did not mind it, but Donggu felt extremely guilty about it. Thus Donggu thought of the stupidest method. If he was not a sword cultivator, then he would use his cultivation level to make up for it. As for junior brother Xialing, he had already nurtured a natal flying sword and was now nourishing it. Not only that, the ancestor of the Xie family, the heavenly monarch of the North Continent Xiexi, who had shown the demeanor of suppressing an entire continent, had given this descendant of the Peach Leaf Alley 2 treasures. One was the sword Immortal's relic of the North Continent that Xialing had refined into his natal item. It was called Peach Leaf. It was a natal flying sword left behind by the sword Immortal after he had disintegrated. Although it was not Xialing's natal flying sword, once it was refined into a natal item, the power of the sword Immortal's relic could be imagined. There was also a sword-strengthening gourd called Full Moon, which was of extremely high quality. Donggu was well aware that his junior brother Xialing did not regard him as a senior brother at all. It was not that Xialing was arrogant and domineering just because of his family background. On the contrary, Xialing did not show any disrespect to Donggu, nor did he show any disdain for Donggu's true identity. Xialing would never refuse to help if he could. Sometimes when Donggu reached the Golden Core stage, Xialing would take the initiative to teach him swordsmanship on his behalf. No one could find any fault with this Xialing. However, Xialing's foundation and opportunities were too good. On the mountain he only had eyes for Wanxiu. Below the mountain he only had eyes for Xialing and a few other young people including Ma Kushuan. At Donggu's and Xialing's level, the food on the mountain was naturally no longer grains. Most of them followed the recipes meticulously compiled by the 100 schools of thought to prepare 3 meals a day. This was actually very costly. However, the Dragon Spring Sword sect had a large family business and few disciples. Wan Tian was also the #1 consecrator of the Dali dynasty. Every year he could receive a large salary from the imperial court. As for Donggu, because he was in the Golden Elixir realm, and because he went to the Book Slip Lake in his early years, he did not do much and earned a small amount of credit. After that he received a peace token from the Ministry of Justice. Now he was also a member of the Dali family, so he also received a considerable amount of official salary. Today Wan Tian left the sword furnace and personally prepared a table of dishes. He only called Donggu. When Donggu saw the dishes on the table, he knew that his senior sister would definitely come. As expected, Wan Xiu quickly entered the house. She served herself and sat beside Wan Tian. Donggu naturally had his back to the door and sat opposite his master Wan Tian. Eat slowly, no one will fight with you. Wan Tian naturally placed some red braised pork in his daughter's bowl before saying to Donggu, "I heard that the original governor, Wu Yuan, has been transferred out of the new province?" Donggu immediately placed down his chopsticks and said politely, "After the Dragon Spring Commandery was promoted to the Dragon Province, this disciple of the imperial tutor did not become the governor of the Dragon Province naturally. Instead, he was transferred to the former territory of the Zhuing dynasty to the south of Lakeview Academy, near the foot of Dali's new central peak. He continued as governor of a region. They all guessed that the imperial tutor had placed great hopes on Wu Yuan in the past, so he had come here to take the lead in expanding the territory. However, he never thought he would be ostracized by the 4 major families and 10 major clans of the small town together, suffering many soft rebuffs. Although he was later promoted from a district magistrate to a governor, Sir Imperial Tutor was already dissatisfied with him. As a result, when the commandery was promoted to a province, Wu Yuan, who had actually worked hard even if he did not contribute much, was demoted to a foreign country. The Dragon Spring Commandery was promoted to the Dragon Province, occupying a vast area. It governed the 4 commanderies of Celadon, Baoshi, Sanjiang and Burning Incense. The small town still belonged to Huaihuang County. Now that the district magistrate Yuan had been promoted to the governor of the Celadon Commandery, the supervisor of the Dragon Kiln, Supervisor Chao, remained in his original position. However, the Ministry of Rights had secretly changed the supervisor's official rank, making him equivalent to a governor of a region. As a result, the 2 young prodigies of the Pillar Kingdom had actually both been promoted. It was just that one of them was in the open while the other was unknown. The governor of the Dragon Province was an outsider to Dali's bureaucracy. He came from the vassal state of Huangting. His name was Wei Li and he came from a frigid clan. In Huangting his official rank was only a measly governor of the 4th rank, but in Dali he became a true feudal official. This surprised the Dali court very much. Afterwards, rumors spread through the capital. It was said that he had been personally selected by the minister of Dali's Ministry of Appointments, so there was no dispute. How could such an exceptional act of promoting a vassal to an important official of Dali go against the rules? The emperor had not said anything anyway and the Ministry of Rights had not made a fuss either, so who would be bold enough to cause trouble? Did they really think old Minister Guan was someone to be trifled with? There were not a lot of Dali officials who could argue with Imperial Tutor Cui and even win an argument. Apart from the changes in the bureaucracy, the 3 city gods of the provinces, prefectures and districts all had their positions fixed too. The 2 city gods of the prefectures and districts were local heroic spirits recommended by the 2 neighboring provinces. Although they had already been recorded by the Ministry of Rights of Dali as candidates for the Confucian temples, city gods and gods of mountains and rivers, under normal circumstances, they were not fated to be given a particularly good position. This time they had become the city god of the Dragon Province for some reason, which was an enviable and lucrative position. As the first city god of the Dragon Province with the highest divine position, the truth about this city god had caused quite a stir in the officialdom of Great Li. Quite a few important officials from the central government were watching the 2 pillars of Great Li as a joke. As the city god of the province, he was not a candidate recommended by the 2 surnames. Instead he came from a small piece of land called Steamed Bun Mountain where the Xiuhua and Chongdan rivers intersected. Wan Tong said slowly, "It's not necessarily a bad thing that Wu Yuan is far away from Dali." Donggu was not too familiar with the inner workings of Dali's government, so he was afraid to say anything. However, Donggu still felt rather regretful about Wu Yuan's departure, as this young governor knew how to conduct himself very well. Donggu admired the way he interacted with the Dragon Spring Sword sect very much. Fortunately, the new governor of the Baoshi Commandery was called Fu Yu. He was one of the first government officials to enter the town with Wu Yuan in the past. He was originally a secretary. Only when he emerged from behind the scenes did many of his colleagues who had worked with him for many years discover in surprise that this governor Fu actually came from the eldest son of the Fu clan of Dali. The Fu clan was a powerful clan outside the surnames of the pillars of the kingdom. After Fu Yu became the governor of the Baoshi Commandery, he paid a visit to the Dragon Spring Sword sect very soon. Donggu had a pleasant conversation with him, which was quite a good thing. Wan Tong said, "In the future you don't have to worry about receiving and seeing people off on the mountain. As long as you don't turn down these matters, you'll never be able to finish them. How are you supposed to cultivate then? The foundation of the Dragon Spring Sword sect isn't how to conduct themselves." Wan Tong glanced at Donggu, who was trembling in fear. He probably misunderstood that Wan Tong was not very satisfied with his eldest disciple. Wan Tong had a rare smile on his face. "I didn't take you in as a disciple to do odd jobs. When it comes to cultivation, you're now half a stickler on the mountain. Every time you encounter a small bottleneck on the mountain, you don't have to waste your time on the mountain. You can take this opportunity to go out and gain experience. Usually, you'll take the initiative to communicate with the Ministry of Justice of Dali. Now that the Aquarius continent is in chaos, you might be able to bring a few disciples back after you go down the mountain. Next time, you can talk to the Ministry of Justice and make a trip to the mountain boundary of Gan province first. No matter what, you still have to win over the Wind Snow Temple. Donggu nodded as if relieved of a heavy burden. He was full of gratitude to his master. His master's words were not only to relieve his pressure, but also to teach him. More importantly, it was equivalent to letting him gain the approval of the cultivators of the Wind Snow Temple. Wan Tong suddenly picked up his chopsticks and slapped away his daughter's chopsticks that were reaching for the last piece of braised pork. Leave some for Donggu. Wan Xiu had already filled several bowls of rice by now. Donggu didn't dare to laugh. Wan Tong said to Donggu, "What do you think of the 12 in-name disciples?" Donggu described the talents and temperaments of the 12 people one by one. Wan Tong looked at his daughter. Wan Xiu picked up a large amount of food with her chopsticks and slightly shook it so she didn't pick up much. Wan Tong looked at the dishes that were almost empty and simply pushed them in front of her. Wan Xiu smiled and asked, "Father, why don't you drink today?" Wan Tong shook his head and suddenly said, "In the future when you go to the Dragon Spine Mountain to cultivate, just remember not to have any conflicts with the cultivators of Marshall Mountain. Also, no matter what strange things you encounter, don't be surprised. Father knows what to do." Wan Xiu nodded. Wan Tong asked about the recent situation of Dali. The Dragon Spring Sword sect had the most detailed mountain and river bulletin of the Aquarius continent, which was personally prepared by the Dali Imperial Court and regularly sent to the cloud-spreading mountain and spirit-graceful mountain of Longquan Prefecture. Wan Tong said without any reason, "In fact, the disciple I wanted to take the most was Zhou Xian. Donggu had heard of this person. He was best friends with Qin Pingon of Mud Bottle Alley. He almost died at the hands of the mountain-moving ape of Xingyang Mountain. Because of this, Zhou Xianyang and Qin Pingon became mortal enemies with Xingyang Mountain and the Su clan of Qingfeng City. When the Su clan sold the completed Immortal mansion to the Dali Imperial Court at a low price, it was not without fear of Qin Pingon. Later, the Su clan of Qingfeng City took advantage of the situation and made some measures to mend the pen after the sheep were lost. They married a daughter of the first wife to a bastard son of the Yuan clan of Shangzhou State, and even provided money and manpower to help the Yuan clan's descendants control a troop of cavalry at the border. After all, no one could have imagined that the youth of Mud Bottle Alley would be able to walk step by step to this day. Wan Tong and Donggu only ate a few dishes symbolically. Then the master and disciple began to take a walk. Donggu said softly, "Mountain God Wei has organized another night banquet. The shop left behind by the bag shop at the Oxhorn Mountain Ferry has been reopened. The items sold are all gifts from the gods of mountains and rivers and cultivators from all over the world." Wan Tong smiled and said, "It seems that Luapa Mountain is very short of money." Compared to Donggu, who was in the Golden Core realm, Wan Tong was not only in the unpolished Jade realm, but also a saint. Therefore he could see more clearly. Wei Pai's breakthrough this time was the kind that did not have a bottleneck. To be precise, the bottleneck of Wei Pai's ascension to the upper 5 realms had long been broken by someone, and it was done very cleverly. Wan Tong also came to this conclusion after a long period of observation. What Wei Pai pursued was the unpolished Jade realm that was easily accessible, and more flawless, not whether or not he could break through. Therefore that person's bamboo blade at Chess Block Mountain was very accurate. Wan Tong felt melancholy. In the ordinary sense, the level of a great sword immortal's sword technique and the amount of sword intent could be barely seen by sword cultivators of the upper 5 realms who were slightly inferior. However, for some people it would take many years for one to see the strength of their swords. Great strength but not obvious. At the end of the day, the sword still had to land on the human heart to see the skill. Wan Tong hoped that one day such a sword cultivator would appear in the Dragon Spring Sword sect, even if it was a little later. Donggu quickly bid farewell and left. Wan Tong looked into the distance. The Northern Peak realm as the place where Dali rose, Wei Pai, the Northern Peak mountain god, the only mountain god that could contend against him in the Aquarius continent, was not in the Middle Peak, but the Southern Peak, a female mountain god. The current Dali Middle Peak was the old Middle Peak of the Zhuang dynasty. The mountain god was still the same, and could be said to have profited from a disaster, becoming the middle peak of the Aquarius continent. The Mo family ranger sword cultivator Su Ruo was currently overseeing the middle peak mountain god. Wan Tong had his eyes on the new western peak Ganzhou Mountain. Because it was not far from the Wind Snow Temple, and Ganzhou Mountain was not in the 5 peaks of any dynasty, Wan Tong's trip was the easiest. Therefore, the #1 sword forger of the Aquarius continent also went to the Wind Snow Temple to catch up with his seniors and fellow disciples. This was actually the new emperor of Dali deliberately giving the Dragon Spring Sword sect a merit of supporting the dragon. Compared to the surging undercurrents and murderous intents on Su Ruo's side, Wan Tong had nothing to worry about. On the other hand, Dali's new eastern peak, Qi Mountain, was in a chaotic battle. Most of the top worshippers of Dali were Gold Core and Nascent Soul Earth Immortals. During the Dali Mountain conferring ceremony, there was an extremely fierce battle. Cultivators from various countries swarmed in from all directions, trying to kill their way up the mountain and kill the Dali envoy. In the end, even the new emperor's conferring ceremony, Golden Mud, Silver Rope, Seal of Seals, was almost shattered by a hostile Nascent Soul cultivator. After repelling those cultivators, the worshippers of Dali also suffered heavy casualties. After that, the Right Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights of Dali took the place of the Heavenly Patrol. It was another encirclement that was obviously a trap. Still, many cultivators from various destroyed countries entered the trap and died generously. This caused the spiritual energy in the area around the new eastern peak Qi Mountain, within a radius of 1,000 miles, to be extremely chaotic. After that, there were sporadic cultivators rioting. However, Qi Mountain finally became Dali's new eastern peak after a bumpy journey. The deity in charge was one of the old 5 peaks of Dali. Compared to the conferring of the 5 peaks, Dali had already begun to choose a site in the southern part of the Aquarius continent to build a temporary capital. Song Jisun would be conferred as a vassal in Old Dragon City. When the temporary capital was built, Song Jisun, who was named Song Mu on the Imperial Clan Court's registry, would be in charge of the temporary capital. One of the sites was the old capital of the Zhuang dynasty. The advantage was that it did not consume too much national power. The disadvantage on the surface was that it was too close to Lakeview Academy. As for the more hidden taboos of the imperial court, naturally, there were some people who did not want the new vassal Song Mu to rely on the coordination of the temporary capital and Old Dragon City to take over half of the Aquarius continent. However, the final location of the temporary capital was not decided by the Dali imperial court. As the chief consecrator of Dali, Wan Tong could make suggestions. The new emperor of the Song clan would definitely listen to his suggestions. However, Wan Tong would only remain silent. Wan Xiu appeared beside Wan Tong. Wan Tong, who had gone to the Wind Snow Temple this time, said softly, "When father was young, the teachers of the Wind Snow Temple all felt that the world would not change too much. They only needed to cultivate well. Therefore, us juniors had similar thoughts. Now all the old people are sighing. They can no longer see what the Aquarius continent will be like in just a few decades. Xiu, do you think this is a good thing or a bad thing?" Wan Xiu thought for a while and did not answer the question. The Dragon Spring Sword sect has one less blessed land. Wan Tong's expression became serious. He used the saint's ability to isolate a small world. There are 2 things. First, the stone cliff of the dragon beheading platform in the Dragon Spine Mountain was divided into 3. They belong to our Dragon Spring Sword sect, Wind Snow Temple and True Martial Mountain. However, you may not know that the dragon beheading platform that the Wind Snow Temple is in charge of guarding and mining is almost an empty shell. Father has always pretended not to see it. Therefore, when I visited the ancestor of the Wind Snow Temple and mentioned this matter, the ancestor said that I did not need to care about it. It was equivalent to tacitly admitting that the dragon beheading platform had disappeared. Therefore, when you go there to cultivate, you do not need to care about this matter. The second thing is the blessed land that you mentioned. Actually, the Yang family shop can do business there. There are ready-made ones, but the price will probably be difficult to accept. Actually, the price is fine. At most, we can just buy it on credit. At this point, Wan Tong looked at his daughter and said worriedly, "I still don't want to cause any trouble." At the end of the day, he still did not want Wan Xiu to get involved too early. Everything that Yuan Tong had done, from leaving the Wind Snow Temple to becoming the Saint of Dragon Pearl Grotto Heaven at the cost of his cultivation base, to establishing his own sect, to being invited by the Song clan to be a consecrator, and so on, was all for his daughter. However, Yuan Xiu said, "Father, there's no problem. Father, do you understand what kind of temper old Yang has?" Yuan Tong smiled and said, "Father, I really don't know. Other than Qi Jingchun, there were so many saints from the 3 sects and 1 family in the history of Dragon Pearl Grotto Heaven. Probably no one dared to say that they knew what that old man was thinking." Yuan Tong was no exception. Yuan Xiu looked at the town and took out an embroidered handkerchief. She picked up a piece of pastry and said vaguely, "It's very simple. Old Yang will bet heavily on whoever is purer and has the hope of going higher. I don't think I'm bad, so father, you can give it a try. As for the price, why don't you tell that senior that the Dragon Spring Sword sect wants the ready-made blessed land, no matter how big it is? As for what you need Yuan Xiu to do in the future, it will depend on Yuan Xiu's mood." Yuan Tong was puzzled. "Is that okay?" Yuan Xiu narrowed her eyes and smiled. Probably because the pastry tasted good, she was in a good mood. She clapped her hands and said, "Let's give it a try." Yuan Tong hesitated for a moment. "Are we really going to talk like that?" Yuan Xiu nodded. He was about to reach out. Yuan Tong had already used his saint's divine power and silently appeared in the backyard of the Yang family shop. Yuan Xiu sighed. She wanted her father to bring some pastries back. In less than half an hour, Yuan Tong returned to the spiritual Grace Mountain with a strange expression. Looking at his daughter, he shook his head and sighed. Is there really such a good thing as a free lunch falling from the sky? When doing business with old Yang, there was one thing that could be guaranteed. It was even more reliable than any oath in the world. That was, the words that this senior said were accurate and there was no need to doubt. Yuan Xiu glanced at the sky and thought that it would be good if some pastries fell. In Old Dragon City, located at the southernmost tip of the Aquarius continent, after the 2 major events of Fu Nanhua marrying the legitimate daughter of the Jiang family of Cloud Forest and the city lord fighting a 9th realm martial artist, to the Qi cultivators, it was just a short time to catch their breath before they welcomed an even bigger event. Song Mu of Dali, as the younger brother of the current Emperor Dali of the same father and mother, had now become the most powerful vassal king of the Song family, and happened to be vassal of Old Dragon City. The other sons of the previous emperor had also received the title of vassal king, but they were all 3-word kings. They left Dali to go to the various destroyed countries, but they were far inferior to Song Mu, the king who was on par with him. It was to the extent that it was frightening. To Old Dragon City, which was used to being free and undisciplined, this should have been a nightmare. However, the major clans, including the Fu family, seemed to have already communicated with the Dali imperial court. Not only did they not have any resistance, but they also did business in the vast territories north of Old Dragon City and south of the Zhuing dynasty. Compared to before, they had clear boundaries. Now the major clans in Old Dragon City had started to cooperate with each other. For example, the Fan family and the Sun family had a close relationship. No matter who worked with whom to make money, the only thing they had in common was that the trade routes of these major clans in Old Dragon City were opened by Dali. As long as they had the peace token, they could seek help from all the Dali cavalries and the vassal states of the Song family along the way. Therefore, when the Fu family gave up half of the inner city of Old Dragon City as Song Mu's vassal mansion, no one was surprised. However, as the hub of an entire continent, the business of the Old Dragon City was still affected to a certain extent at first. Many Qi refinement warriors who treated the Old Dragon City as a paradise and a nest of gold also left quietly to observe the changes. However, as the Tongya clan and the Jade Gui clan of the southern continent expressed their attitude one after another, the business of the Old Dragon City quickly returned to its peak. The business was prosperous even more so than before. Especially after Song Mu entered the Old Dragon City, the situation did not change at all. Many cultivators returned to the city one after another and continued to enjoy themselves. On this day, a young man who took off the vassal king's robe left the vassal mansion and went to a medicine shop in a shabby alley in the outer city with his maidservant. He did not have any retainers because he did not need them. There was a 4-legged snake with horns on its head curled up in the young man's sleeve. Moreover, the head of the Fu family in Old Dragon City was equivalent to his private consecrator. The medicine shop that had been closed for a few years had just reopened. The shopkeeper was an old man and there was a young man in white with a mole between his eyebrows. He was extremely handsome. Beside him was a young child who looked like a fool. He had red lips and white teeth, but his eyes were unfocused and he did not know how to speak. It was a pity. Song Jisun walked into the alley. It was cool in autumn and the maidservant beside him, GQ, looked even more beautiful. When the master and maidservant crossed the threshold of the medicine shop, the old shopkeeper did not recognize the identity of the young man in front of him. He smiled and asked, "Are you here to buy medicine? You can choose whatever you want. The price has been written." Song Jisun frowned, glanced at the old man and began to choose the herbs. GQ took a stool from the medicine shop and sat at the door. The old man smiled. These two little fellows did not regard him as an outsider. He was now not afraid of anything. He dared to walk sideways in the entire Aquarius continent. Of course, the prerequisite was to follow the young man in white. This old shopkeeper was Fairy Lu Li Chen Xiaoyong, who failed in his scheme in the Yanji region of the beautiful clothes kingdom. Not only did he fail to get the heavenly master seal hidden by the golden city god Shunwen, but he also almost died. He almost couldn't keep the glass cup. Fortunately, both the state preceptor and Green Wave Pavilion did not care about his negligence. This was also normal. State Preceptor Cui was a peak figure who aspired to annex a continent, so why would he care about temporary gains and losses? However, when the youth in white found his hiding place, old man Luli was miserably tricked. How could he be so miserable? He was so miserable that not a single drop of his evil tricks was left behind. Now he only knew that this youth, surnamed Cui, was the person in charge of all the southern spies and death warriors of the great Li Song. Jisun's heart rippled. After getting that sentence, he began to walk to the backyard of the medicine shop. Just as he lifted the bamboo curtain, Luli hurriedly said, "Guest, you can't go to the back." Song Jisun smiled and said, "My name is Song Mu." Luli thought for a moment, smiled awkwardly and said, "Guest, please help yourself." Song Jisun turned his head to look at the door. "Not together?" GQ turned her head and smiled. "I'll pass." She was afraid of only 3 people in her life. One was already dead, one was no longer in this world, and the last one was half in the backyard. Song Jisun went to the backyard alone. He walked to the main room where the door was opened. His footsteps were light and slow. Before entering, he straightened his clothes. The reason why Song Jisun could live until today was because of the person in the house and his uncle Song Jianqiang's decision. As for his mother and the emperor's brother, they probably did not mind that he re-recorded and erased his name in the imperial clan court. He stepped over the threshold. The white-clothed youth seemed to have turned the main room into a study. On the square table, there was a picture of a snowy night on a plank road. The white lines were fine, but there was a freehand atmosphere. Could be said to be a divine work. He also opened a clumsy Jianghu romance book published by a private bookstore. The book was pressed with a small bronze beast paperweight, and there were many comments in red. Song Jisun bowed and said, "Song Mu pays respect to imperial tutor." Cui Dongshan was lying on the table, his legs twisted together. His posture was lazy. He turned his head to look at Song Jisun and said with a smile, "It's been many years in this small town. We finally meet again." Song Jisun said respectfully, "If not for imperial tutor's kindness, Song Jisun would not even have the chance to become a member of Dali's imperial family, much less be conferred the title of king and vassal of Old Dragon City." Cui Dongshan's words were shocking. Back then, you and Zhao Yao were both given gifts by Qi Jingchun. As for Zhao Yao, in order to survive, he made a deal with me and gave up the Chun seal. It's hard to say what the gains and losses were. As for you, Qi Jingchun left those books for you. It's a pity that you didn't pay attention and didn't bother to read them. In fact, Qi Jingchun left behind the insights of Confucianism and legalism in those books. As long as you were sincere, you would naturally be able to read them. Qi Jingchun was not the kind of person who was inflexible. He had high expectations for you. Who was the one who did this shady business of Confucianism on the outside and legalism on the inside? If you had obtained that knowledge, your uncle and I might have left an extra claw on your clothes. Song Jisun's expression was as calm as ever. Cui Dongshan nodded. Your temperament is better than Zhao Yao's. It's no wonder that Zhao Yao admired you all those years ago and couldn't play chess as well as you. Cui Dongshan pointed at the bench. Song Jisun sat upright on the bench. Cui Dongshan was still sprawled on the table as if he was chatting with someone. He smiled and said, Song Yuzhang's death was truly not worth it. The methods used by the late emperor to build the covered bridge could not be exposed to the public. After all, so many of the Song clan's descendants had died. Song Yuzhang, the supervising official, not only did he not know when to stop and draw a clear line between himself and you so that he could enjoy the rest of his life in the Ministry of Rights, he actually treated you, a prince, as his illegitimate son. If this isn't courting death, how else can you find him? Song Jisun's cheeks moved slightly. He was probably gritting his teeth slightly. Cui Dongshan laughed and clicked his tongue. You Song Jisun have a big heart. You're still far-sighted when it comes to whether or not to sit on the dragon throne. But you're also narrow-minded. Even now you still can't let go of a mere mountain god, Song Yuzhang. Song Jisun clenched his fists and remained silent. Cui Dongshan smiled and asked, Ma Kuxuan is pestering your maidservant. Do you feel unhappy in your heart? Song Jisun nodded. I know that GQ doesn't have any thoughts about him. However, this is ultimately a disgusting matter. Therefore, when the situation allows me to kill Ma Kuxuan, I will personally slaughter this bastard from Apricot Blossom Lane. Cui Dongshan waved his hand and smiled. Bastard? Don't say such arrogant words. The descendants of the Song clan, the so-called heavenly royalty, are the bastards in Ma Kuxuan's eyes. Furthermore, the Martial Mountain will definitely protect Ma Kuxuan. Furthermore, Ma Kuxuan's cultivation speed has been witnessed by all the Qi cultivators in the continent. Therefore, your so-called situation will only become more and more difficult for you as time passes. Song Jisun shook his head. When things reach an extreme, they will move in the opposite direction. Since I am a king in the mortal world, it is difficult for me to change my status. In any case, I don't need to fight with him. In this world, there are many ways to kill other than using one's fist. Ma Kuxuan had killed 2 golden core sword cultivators in the Zhou dynasty. The first time he had advanced step by step and toyed with his opponent. The second time he had chosen to fight with his life on the line. Ma Kuxuan had revealed his cultivation potential in the 2 battles. Vaguely, he had become the undisputed #1 cultivation genius of the Aquarius continent. Before Ma Kuxuan, there had only been 2 people who were publicly recognized as heavenly geniuses on the mountain. One was Li Tuanjing from the Wind and Thunder Garden, and the other was Wei Jin from the Wind and Snow Temple. If Li Tuanjing had not been troubled by love, there had always been a rumor on the mountain. Once he became a pure jade sword cultivator, he would have a chance to become an immortal or even an ascendant. When that time came, even the Divine Grandeur sect would not be able to suppress the Wind and Thunder Garden, let alone Xingyang Mountain. Therefore, Li Tuanjing's past grudges were actually very complicated. Xingyang Mountain was definitely not the only one involved. However, these truths were all gone with the passing of Li Tuanjing. Every dog had its day. Xingyang Mountain, which had been suppressed by Li Tuanjing for a long time, was finally able to hold its head high and firmly suppress the Wind and Thunder Garden. If the new Garden Lord Huang He had not gone into seclusion and forced the various factions to wait for him to come out, the Wind and Thunder Garden, which was only supported by Liu Baqiao, would have long been challenged by the angry old sword cultivators of Xingyang Mountain. Cui Dongshan tapped his fingers on the table lightly and fell into deep thought. Song Jisun was not anxious at all. He never thought that being the vassal of Dali gave him the right to stand tall in front of this person. In fact, even if he changed his clothes and sat on the dragon throne, it would still be the same. Cui Dongshan looked out of the room and said for no reason, "A bird born in a cage will think that flapping its wings to fly is a disease. When a chicken pecks at the ground and a hawk flashes by in the sky, it will start to worry about the grain being stolen." Song Jisun carefully pondered the deeper meaning of these 2 sentences. Cui Dongshan sighed. Let's not talk about these trivial things. I came here this time not only to relax but also to tell you something serious. As a vassal, you can't always stay in Old Dragon City. The curtains are about to rise on the Second Great Battle of Dali. Go to the Zhou dynasty and personally take charge of the construction of the capital. At the same time, build a good relationship with the Mo family. A war that uses war to support war is meaningless if it stops at plundering. Song Jisun asked softly, "May I ask Imperial Tutor, what is the second battle?" Cui Dongshan smiled. Destruction without the ability to repair and rebuild is self-destruction. It is not the way to go in the long run. Song Jisun was very smart. He somewhat understood the meaning of the imperial tutor's words. Cui Dongshan continued, Dali's iron cavalry's road to the south has broken all the old rules and the dynasty's laws. This is just a battlefield on horseback. Next, the military men of Great Li who had dismounted from their horses would have to figure out how to promulgate the laws of Great Li. Laws were dead, they were just there. Therefore the key lay in the people. Whether the laws were good or evil depended partly on the document and partly on the people. How the North is doing and how the South is doing will be a test between you, the vassal king, and His Majesty the Emperor. Don't take the Li dynasty's old man Guan as fools. Each and every one of them is watching you too with their eyes wide open. Song Jisun said in a deep voice, Thank you, Imperial Tutor, for your advice. Cui Dongshan smiled. Do you know why the late emperor wanted you to be the emperor, but before he died he asked your uncle to be the regent? Why did he have to act like the throne was passed down from brother to brother? Song Jisun's face slightly changed. Cui Dongshan twitched the corner of his mouth and pointed at Song Jisun. In the past it was the late emperor and the vassal Song Zhangqiang. Now it is the new emperor Song Mu. Song Jisun's lips slightly moved and his face turned pale. Cui Dongshan said, Your father has done a good job as the emperor. As for being a father, I think it is not bad. At least for you, the late emperor really gave a lot of thought. How much do you hate the Empress Dowager in your heart? Doesn't the new emperor have a reason to hate the late emperor? So Song Yuzhang's matter, the knot in your heart is a bit funny. The funny thing is not your feelings. Humans are not plants. How can they be emotionless? It is a very normal emotion. The funny thing is that you don't understand the rules. Do you really think that the person who killed Song Yuzhang was the descendant of the Lu family? Was it your mother who put his head in a wooden box and sent it to the capital? Was it the late emperor? Clearly it was and it wasn't. Can't you understand? You still dare to talk nonsense here and rely on the situation to kill Ma Kushuan, who seems to be the chosen one. Song Jisun stood up and bowed again. Imperial Tutor's teachings Song Jisun has learned. Cui Dongshan glanced at him and said, The books Qi Jingchun left you and the knowledge he imparted seem to teach you Confucianism on the surface. In reality it is the opposite. It is just that you have no chance to figure it out. Song Jisun sat down again, not saying a word. Cui Dongshan waved his hand. Song Jisun stood up and took his leave. He walked out of the alley with the servant girl GQ. Cui Dongshan came to the threshold and sat down, yawning. The old shopkeeper that he had casually brought along ran into the courtyard and asked flatteringly, Immortal Master Cui, is that person really the Dali King Song Mu? Cui Dongshan said, That kid is lying to you. He's just teasing you. Lu Li's face was awkward. To believe or not to believe. This was a problem. Cui Dongshan waved his hand. Go back to being a shopkeeper. Lu Li hurriedly left the courtyard. Cui Dongshan changed his position and lay on the threshold, using his hands as a pillow. The matter of the colorful clothes kingdom's Yanji County was only a small part of many plans. Using the Golden City God as a thread to affect the colorful clothes kingdom was one of the small plans on the surface. What he and the old bastard really wanted was even more hidden. He wanted to use a tactful method that conformed to the rules and the Great Tao to release that poor guy in White Emperor City who had been suppressed by the Heavenly Master Talisman for 1,000 years. Now he should be called Lu Qiqing. For the time being he had no choice but to attach himself to the soul of a scholar. This favor, even if the other party did not want to repay it, he had to repay it. As for when he would repay this favor, it would depend on when Cui Dongshan came to find him. In the chess game of the Aquarius continent, there were many such unknown tricks. But for the two of them it was not a trick, it was just a normal game of chess. For example, in the Azure Luan country the old bastard had his eyes on Lu Qingfeng and Li Baozhen as well as that Wei Liang. The things that the three of them had done in the land of the Azure Luan country had far-reaching significance. It was even possible that their future influence would exceed that of the Aquarius continent. It was just that the three of them were not too clear about it. In the end, the first one to understand the significance was probably Lu Qingfeng, who was not even a cultivator. Living in a corner for more than 100 years, he had done so many trivial things. Sometimes Cui Dongshan would ask himself what was the meaning of this. If he just let it be and let it be, the mountains would collapse and the earth would crack. If the universe was changed, wouldn't it mean that the world had learned its lesson? Would the final result be better? Cui Dongshan opened his eyes wide, looking at the scenery above his head. The people who went with the flow were the majority of the people. Being a little smarter, they liked to take shortcuts when interacting with people. They wanted to find ways to save effort and energy. They wanted to do everything quickly. The faster they achieved their goals, the better. There was nothing wrong with that. In truth, to be able to do that, it was already not easy. But as the wise sages said, life is like a journey in reverse. I am also a traveler. So there were sages that said, the world is strange. There are all kinds of extraordinary views, often because it is dangerous and far away and rarely visited by people. Only those who have the will can slowly walk and see the spectacular sights. Cui Dongshan sighed. Everything in the world seemed to be boring in the end. Zhou Xian, who was pulled out from the chessboard by Lu Qin. The martial artist of the 10th level Song Jiangqiang. The sword immortal of the Wind Snow Temple Wei Jin. The young sword cultivator of the Zhou dynasty, who obtained a blessing in disguise, who carried the fate of the country. Lu Xianyang, who broke and stood up, who practiced the sword in his dreams. Gu Qin, who did not change but became smarter, who understood the rules, who definitely had the chance to become a true wild cultivator that was more mature than Lu Laoqing. The leader of the Jianghu Li Lu. Guanxiu. The Yellow River in the Wind Thunder Garden. The hidden chess piece that Qi Jin personally nurtured and protected by the Divine Grandeur sect. Xieling, who had great fortune. There were also some young people who had not yet stood out or were not famous, who could possibly be the future pillars of the Aquarius continent. Cui Dongshan sat up and was in a daze for a while, then continued to lie down at the square table. His gaze shifted and the book on the table was opened, which was brought out from the Great Sui Kingdom's Cliff Academy. When Cui Dongshan had nothing to do, he would flip through a few pages and write a few sentences. Immediately he flipped open the book and saw that the author had written, carrying a sword to steal clothes. He leapt onto the roof, the tiles were silent, the moon was bright and he flew like a bird. Then he, the book's flipper, commented, he really has the bearing of a sword immortal. Cui Dongshan moved the paperweight away and spat on his fingertips. He picked up the book and lightly flipped it back. Glancing at the comment, he did not forget to praise himself. Good words, as expected of Mr.'s disciple. Cui Dongshan raised his head and saw a muddle-headed and ignorant child standing in the room beside him. Cui Dongshan smiled as he walked around the square table, bent down and patted the child's head, his eyes filled with kindness. Little Gaoqing, you have to grow up quickly. 529. After Qin Pingon retracted his foot from the stream, he exhaled heavily and shook his right wrist, causing some ashes to scatter. Back then, Qin Pingon's right arm was imprisoned by the assassin of Deer Cutting Mountain using Buddhism's supernatural powers. This was the remnant of the karmic entanglement that was completely shattered. As a nascent soul sword cultivator who was about to break through the realm, Qi Jinglong also commented on the assassination in the valley with the words, extremely dangerous. This Buddhism's supernatural powers probably accounted for half of it. Qin Pingon squatted down and used both hands to wash his face. Looking at his reflection in the water, he tilted his head and used his palm to rub the fine stubble on his chin. He was a little worried that he would become a bearded man like Xianxia. Qin Pingon reached his hand into the water, opened his palm and pressed down lightly. The water in the stream suddenly stopped and then continued to flow as usual. Qin Pingon changed his hand gesture and his palm drew a circle. The whirlpool in the stream beside his feet grew bigger and bigger. However, Qin Pingon soon stopped and the stream returned to its original calm state. In the past, when he traveled with Zhang Shanfeng, he saw that the young Daoist often made gestures by himself. He did not use his fists nor his palms. The meaning was strange. Qin Pingon learned a little bit of the gestures, but he always felt that something was wrong. This was actually quite strange. In terms of the strength of the fist technique, even 100 Zhang Shanfeng would not be a match for Qin Pingon. Moreover, Qin Pingon had always been very fast in learning fist techniques. Just like when he was in the Lotus Flower Blessed Land, Qin Pingon had seen Zhong Qiu's basic fist technique and displayed it himself. Not only was it similar in form, it was also somewhat similar in spirit. However, Qin Pingon still could not understand Zhang Shanfeng's fist technique. Qin Pingon didn't think too much about it and assumed that it was Zhang Shanfeng's fist technique. It was a unique technique of the Daoists who cultivated in the mountains. It was a technique that had to be complemented by the Daoists who cultivated in the mountains. The reason why the lowest level of Jianghu martial artists were jokingly called martial artists was because they only knew a little about the stances and styles of their fists, but did not know the true meaning. In the final analysis, what was really important was the path of the pure genuine qi. Further down there were the two words divine intent, which was another mysterious realm. The same type of fist, but the fist intent had many differences. The same master and the same fist manual, but it could be the 9 sons of the dragon, each with a different background. This was the same principle as how people looked at the mountains, the water, the wind, and the snow, each with their own understanding. That was why it was said that the master led the way, but the cultivation was up to the individual. Qin Pingon stood up and did a 6-step stance, slowly stretching his muscles and bones. Refining a hero's gallbladder was the key to Realm 6. The so-called hero's gallbladder was not a physical object, but a place where the pure genuine qi and the martial artist's soul cultivated. Its significance was great, somewhat similar to the Jindan of a cultivator. Qin Pingon had previously said that he was only 2 points away from breaking through. Now that he had a hero's gallbladder, there was only 1 point left. In reality, the degree of toughness of Qin Pingon's body was already comparable to that of the Jindan realm. Cui Cheng's fists, the sparring with Zhou Xian, the tempering in the heavenly tribulation thunderclouds, the many killings on the long journey, and of course the tireless practice of his fists. Every bit of it was the external cultivation of a pure martial artist. But this point was very likely to be a huge bottleneck. The distance to entering the Jindan realm was like heaven and earth. But Qin Pingon was not in a hurry. The bigger the bottleneck, the better. The greater the chance of fighting for the strongest Realm 6. Qin Pingon had almost never thought about the word strongest before. Back then, the 3 strongest realms were forcefully hammered out by the old man in the bamboo house of Luopa Mountain. It had nothing to do with whether Qin Pingon wanted it or not. It had fallen into the hands of Cui Cheng, a Realm 10 martial artist. Was it something that you, Qin Pingon, could give up just because you did not want it? One of the fundamental veins of Qin Pingon's mental path, one end of which was what old man Yao had said, seize what's yours and don't even think about what's not yours. To sum it up, it was nothing more than the 4 words, do not ask for external help, on the Buddhist plaque above the crab shop. Naturally, it extended to the principle of life is 8 feet long, but do not ask for 10 feet long. It would be regarded as a natural principle by Qin Pingon. This was a mental path that came naturally when the conditions were right. Therefore, Qin Pingon's every word and action over the long years would be subtly influenced. For example, the martial arts fate of Old Dragon City was defeated by Qin Pingon twice in a row. Also, Qin Pingon was almost never willing to take the initiative to enter the blessed enclave to search for opportunities. He liked to pick up scraps and make a small fortune. It was like how people often saw streams and streams. They would often only see the gurgling water and not the riverbed. Qin Pingon was no exception. This was a principle that Qin Pingon slowly began to understand after continuously observing people, observing Tao, and cultivating his heart during his travels in the North Continent. Those who knew people were wise. Those who knew themselves were the best. It was very difficult. Only the knowledge that had been pondered over time and time again and finally summarized was a principle that truly belonged to him. Qin Pingon sat down beside the stream again. He glanced to the south. He had no idea what he had thought of. He began to smile. He made a gesture of knocking a chestnut. He wondered how Pei Qian was doing at the school right now. An interplanar ferry from the Cape Hempen sect on Skeleton Beach slowly docked on Oxhorn Mountain in the Dragon's Spring Commandery. A graceful woman wore a hedgerow on her head and wielded a mountain walking staff. Beside her was a protector who gave off the phenomenon of a golden core cultivator. He was Sui Jingqing, the nascent soul sword cultivator of floating duckweed sword lake, Rongchong, who had traveled south. After the ferry entered the territory of the Aquarius continent, Sui Jingqing often left his room and gazed at the mountains and rivers of other continents from the bow of the ferry. Below him was the Dali dynasty. After entering the territory of the Dragon province that had been downgraded from a cultivation dwelling to a blessed land, Rongchong glanced at the Cape Cloud Mountain from afar and sighed. The landscape is startling. It really is the northern peak of a continent. The North Continent also had many of the 5 peaks, but compared to the Cape Cloud Mountain that had appeared out of nowhere, they still paled in comparison. When he heard that the mountain god of the northern peak Wei Pai was about to break through to the upper 5 realms, Rong Chong became even more amazed. A mountain god watching over his own territory was equivalent to a saint watching over a minor world. It needed to be viewed from a higher level of cultivation. Once Wei Pai reached the unpolished Jade realm, Dolly would basically possess an immortal with a golden body. Battle prowess was not actually that important. What was important was the fate of Dolly. The spiritual chi and the fate of the entire northern peak would become even more stable because of this. According to Sui Jingqing, Wei Pai was on very good terms with that senior. The night was dark and there were not a lot of fairies on Oxhorn Mountain, so the Cape Sex ferry was particularly eye-catching. The ferry would stop here for a day and only set off tomorrow night, so that the passengers of the North Continent could visit the collapsed old cultivation dwelling. It was said that an Immortal's shop had just opened on Oxhorn Mountain. As for whether they could pick up the scraps, that would depend on their wealth and insight. However, the person in charge of the Cape Sex ferry had clearly informed all the passengers that the northern peak of the Aquarius continent was no longer the North Continent. Moreover, the Dragon's Spring Commandery had the Saint of the Wind Snow Temple Yuan Qing watching over it. The rules were strict and they could not ride the wind or ride swords as they pleased. If anyone caused any trouble after disembarking, the Cape sect could not be blamed for standing by. At the ferry, a man in white with a graceful bearing appeared. A golden earring dangled from his ear. He smiled as he looked at Sui Jingqing and Rong Chong. Spiritual sparrows constantly circled around him, and the glow of the sun seemed to flow around him. Rong Chong could not tell how powerful he was, so his identity was very obvious. He was the mountain god of the highest rank in the entire Aquarius continent, Wei Pai. Sui Jingqing walked forward quickly and asked softly, "Are you mountain god Wei?" Wei Pai glanced at the mountain staff in Sui Jingqing's hand. He raised his hand and gently chased away the sparrows. Then he smiled and nodded. "I have received the message from the flying sword. I am here to welcome you." Rong Chong was a little surprised. How could there be such a polite mountain god? He had to personally welcome the two of them. After all, they were just strangers who came from afar. In the Aquarius continent, Rong Chong might be a nascent soul sword cultivator, so it was not strange for him to receive such treatment. However, in Dolly's Cape Cloud Mountain, Rong Chong did not feel that he was so important. This used to be the territory of the Pearl Grotto Heaven. Other things aside, there were many hidden dragons and crouching tigers. The North Continent's heavenly monarch Xianxia and the South Continent's sword immortal Xiaoxi. There were 2 of them, and it was rumored that they came from the streets of small towns. That was why no one dared to talk about their cultivation level here. It was just a joke. Sui Jingqing was a little frightened. He bowed. "Thank you, mountain god Wei." Wei Pai waved his hand and smiled kindly. "Miss Sui, you don't have to be so polite. Do you want to stroll around Oxhorn Mountain's Baozhai, or go directly to Luopa Mountain?" Sui Jingqing said, "Let's go to Luopa Mountain first." Wei Pai nodded. He used his divine ability and brought Sui Jingqing and Rong Chong to the foot of Luopa Mountain. Rong Chong was shocked again. This Dolly's northern mountain god should not have a problem reaching the upper 5 realms. His compatibility with the mountains and rivers was terrifying. Thousands of miles of mountains and rivers were swept away by shrinking earth. Rong Chong found that his natal flying sword did not move much. Wei Pai said apologetically, "After all, this is Qin Pingan's mountain. I can't bring you directly to the mansion halfway up the mountain. I'll have to trouble Miss Sui and Sword Immortal Rong to walk up the mountain." At the mansion at the entrance of the mountain, a hunched man ran out barefoot without wearing shoes. When he saw the woman, he could not be bothered to look at the man. Wei Pai introduced, "This is Brother Dafeng. He is the gatekeeper of Luopa Mountain." Zheng Dafeng stood beside Wei Pai and rubbed his hands with a smile. "Miss Sui, right? Do you want to come to my place first? Wei Pai and I can make supper. Treat it as helping Qin Pingan entertain his guests and welcoming Miss Sui. After eating and drinking, there's no harm in getting down and resting. My place has many rooms. Even if Miss Sui brings a few friends, there's nothing to be afraid of. By the way, my surname is Zheng. Miss Sui, you can call me Brother Zheng." There's no need to treat me as an outsider. Sui Jingqing was caught off guard. Wei Pai said helplessly, Miss Sui and Sword Immortal Rong, it's fine if you stop for supper or immediately rush up the mountain. Sui Jingqing and Rong Chong saw the hunchbacked man step on Wei Pai's foot. His smile did not change. It's just supper. It's no trouble at all. Sui Jingqing said carefully, then let's go up the mountain. There are some things we need to discuss with Mountain God Wei. It's not convenient to reveal too much about the secret flying sword. Jing Dafeng sighed and twisted Wei Pai's boot with his foot. Wei Pai's expression was calm as he said to Sui Jingqing, all right. Rong Chang's forehead was almost covered in sweat. His sword heart was unstable. The four of them slowly climbed up the mountain. Jing Dafeng lowered his voice and grumbled, so unloyal? Wei Pai smiled. Let's talk about serious matters first. Jing Dafeng said angrily, how is my marriage not a serious matter? I'll drown and die in drought. Wei Bo smiled and said, there are naturally beauties in books and beauties in paintings are also sentimental. Jing Dafeng sighed. In the end it's still lacking. Wei Pai patted Jing Dafeng's shoulder and comforted him. You're a man of striking appearance. Are you afraid you won't be able to find a wife? Jing Dafeng elbowed Wei Pai. If Qin Pingon were to say those words I'd feel confident. Sui Jingqing looked around as he climbed the mountain. He was immersed in his surroundings. This was his senior's home. Rong Chong was a little confused. He could not guess the hunchbacked man's background. He was clearly a martial artist who had lost his Dao and was half a cripple. Why was he so familiar with Wei Pai? Most importantly, neither of them felt that there was anything wrong. Sui Jingqing slowed down his steps. A young woman was practicing on the mountain. Sui Jingqing was familiar with her stance. He began to carefully examine her appearance. She was pretty but not that pretty. Jing Dafeng greeted her with a smile. Sister Tsun, you're still practicing so late. It's too tiring. Brother Jing, look at you. You've lost weight. Sun Yuanji was only practicing her stance. She turned a deaf ear to his words. She walked down the mountain. Jing Dafeng nodded in praise. It's all right. You don't have Brother Dafeng in your eyes. That's right. You have to be focused when practicing. As long as you have Brother Dafeng in your heart, it's enough. Wei Pai said helplessly, don't disturb Sun Yuanji's practice. Jing Dafeng sneered. I'm helping her temper her mind. You're not a martial artist, so what do you know? This lass always goes back and forth between the peak and the foot of the mountain. Where's the real threshold? It's right at the gate at the foot of my mountain. Don't look at how I sit on a small bench and do nothing every time. My murderous eyes and profound words are something that ordinary women and martial artists can withstand. Wei Pai had a look of realization. He nodded. Yes. You're right. Rong Chong was puzzled. This man, based on his words and eyes, if he was born and raised in a small town, how could he not be beaten to death? Or was it because of his mouth that he was heavily injured and his martial path collapsed midway? Was that why he was reduced to the gatekeeper of Luopa Mountain? He had no choice but to rely on Qin Pingon and live under someone else's roof? Or was there more to it and one could not judge a book by its cover? Jing Dafeng chuckled. You really don't believe me. That old woman with the surname Rong couldn't withstand it. One day, Sun Yuanji will have to thank her big brother Da Feng for his good intentions. At that time she will definitely smear her snot and tears all over my body. Just thinking about this scene makes me feel moved. Wei Pai could not be bothered to say anything else. Rong Chang's sword heart was clearly unstable this time. Jing Dafeng was taken aback. He shifted his gaze and asked doubtfully, Sword Immortal Rong, you also have some great Dao benefits? That doesn't make sense. My martial path is usually targeted at women. Rong Chong smiled. It's nothing. I was just a little emotional from being thousands of miles away from home. However, Rong Chong no longer dared to treat the hunchbacked man as an ordinary person. How could ordinary martial arts grandmasters sense the slight vibrations of a nascent soul sword cultivator's intrinsic flying sword? When they were halfway up the mountain, Zhou Lian was already standing there, welcoming them with a smile. After entering Zhou Lian's residence, Rong Chong bade him farewell. Jing Dafeng led him to another place to stay. Rong Chong was not worried that Sui Jingqing would be in danger. One only needed to look at the mountains and rivers in the area under his jurisdiction to know the aura of a mountain and river god. Wei Pai's great Dao was bound to be long. It was not difficult to know whether a senior, who could strike a chord with Lu Jinglong, and a young mountain lord who had an excellent relationship with Wei Pai had a good or bad reputation. Rong Chong and Jing Dafeng met a girl in a pink dress on the way. Jing Dafeng smiled. Little Qin, there's no need to get up on purpose. The residence will be spotless. By the way, this is a guest from the North Continent, Great Sword Immortal Rong. Qin Rushu hurriedly bowed. Greetings, Sword Immortal Rong. I'm Qin Rushu from Luopa Mountain. Rong Chong laughed. A little fire python with rich literary luck? That was strange again. Qin Rushu took out a big bunch of keys and picked out a small bunch. After opening the door, she handed the bunch of keys to Rong Chong. Then she explained in detail to the sword cultivator from the North Continent which door each key corresponded to. However, she also said that it was fine even if the doors were not locked after they moved in. Moreover, she would clean the rooms twice a day. If Sword Immortal Rong did not wish to be disturbed, it was fine too. If he needed someone to serve him tea, she lived nearby and could just call for him. After he finished speaking in a spurt of energy, he quietly followed the two into the residence. It was indeed clean and refreshing. Although it didn't have the celestial aura of an immortal's residence and didn't have the rich aura of a dynasty, it was still very comfortable to look at. Rong Chong was not dissatisfied. Jing Dafeng smiled at Rong Chong. Zhou Xian is the chief steward of Luopa Mountain. Little Qin is the junior steward. Sometimes Zhou Xian has to be under her control. Anyway, I really like Little Qin. Qin Rushu smiled shyly. Rong Chong thought for a moment and was about to take out a greeting gift from the things in front of him to give to this pleasant-looking girl. Qin Rushu was about to leave. However, Jing Dafeng grinned and pressed her head down. She had no choice but to stop. Rong Chong took out a small and cute spirit artifact. It was a gold-plated bamboo incense burner. It was not expensive, but it was worth a few coins. Qin Rushu was a little troubled. She felt that it was too expensive. She could roughly estimate the amount of spirit energy contained in an immortal artifact. Jing Dafeng smiled. Why are you in a daze? Hurry up and accept it. Qin Rushu held the small incense burner with both hands and bowed in gratitude. After Rong Chong settled down, Jing Dafeng left the residence and realized that the girl in pink was still standing not far away from the door. Jing Dafeng smiled and asked, "Where's Qin Lingjun? Why haven't I seen him recently? Where did he go?" Qin Rushu said softly, "He's been causing a ruckus at the back of the crayfish recently. He's always so playful." There were many mountains under his master's name now. Apart from the Treasure Steel Mountain, Rosy Clouds Peak and Immortal Grass Mountain that were rented to the Dragon Spring Sword Sect for 300 years. There was also Luopa Mountain and True Pearl Mountain. Later on, he bought the Grey Mist Mountain that was very close to Luopa Mountain and occupied a large area. Oxhorn Mountain after the bundle shop left, Cinnabar Mountain that the Sioux family of Clear Breeze City moved out, as well as Crayfish Back and Twilight Peak, as well as the Sword Prayer platform that was located at the westernmost part of the mountains. Now these 6 mountains were his territory. Apart from Sister Xiaoxiao's family, his master had the most mountains in Longquan County. Jing Dafeng's words hit the nail on the head. He just can't bear to see Pei Qian suffer while practicing martial arts. In addition, with this comparison, he feels that he is not doing his job all day long. He doesn't feel good in his heart, so he just doesn't see it and doesn't feel frustrated, running out to cause trouble. Qin Rushu's expression dimmed. Pei Qian's practice of martial arts was too tragic. It was not the slightest bit better than her master's practice of martial arts back then. After preparing the medicine bucket, every time she carried the unconscious Pei Qian out of the second floor of the bamboo building, she would carry the bucket to the second floor to wash the blood stains. There were blood stains on the floor and walls. Tears flowed from her eyes. There were many times when she cleaned the blood stains while looking at the old senior who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. Unfortunately, the old senior was just plain dumb. Jing Dafeng patted the little girl's head. "Go rest early. You're busy with the same thing all day long. Feels like even if you do this for hundreds or thousands of years, you won't find it boring. Even I have to admire you. If that Qin Lingjun had half of your patience and conscience, he would have long since relied on his own abilities to make others look at him in a different light. He wouldn't need to rub his face on Qin Pingan's side every day, or rub his seat on Wei Pai's side." Qin Rushu said guiltily, but my cultivation is too slow. I can't help with anything. Jing Dafeng sighed. Don't think like that. Without the Qin girl, Luopa Mountain will lose half of its human aura. Qin Rish's eyes widened in high spirits. Really? Jing Dafeng chuckled. You're not allowed to be proud. Keep up the good work. The little girl in pink nodded vigorously. On the top of Luopa Mountain, the one who ran around the most every day was probably this little girl. She came and went by herself, silently doing trivial things by herself. It seemed like no one had ever cared about her. But in fact everyone cared about her. In the Luopa Mountain, if Lu Baixiang and the others had suffered a great loss outside, with Qin Pingan's stubborn temperament, perhaps he would dawdle with them and try to reason with them first. But if the little girl in pink were to be bullied outside the mountain, would Qin Pingan still be reasonable? Jing Dafeng held the back of his head with both hands and walked slowly. He did not go to Zhou Lian's courtyard to meddle. Zhou Lian did things that Qin Pingan, who was as meticulous as hair, was willing to rest assured. Jing Dafeng, who was a rough man, had nothing to worry about. As for the beauty Li who visited Luopa Mountain, Jing Dafeng had seen her, so he let it go. It was just like the scene in Old Dragon City's dusty medicine shop back then. The moon hung high in the autumn night. Jing Dafeng slowly descended the mountain. He looked forward to Qin Pingan going down the mountain to reason with others. For example, Xingyang Mountain. And Dali's capital. The most interesting part was that when Qin Pingan decided to go, it must be because of his reasons. Whether he said it or not, the other party would have to listen even if they did not want to. However, Jing Dafeng was also looking forward to the mountains outside Luopa Mountain. He wanted to see who would settle there in the future. But what was most worth looking forward to was what name Luopa Mountain would choose when it finally established its own sect. Previously, when they chatted about this matter, Zhou Lian and Wei Pai looked at each other and smiled impolitely. At the small courtyard on the mountain. After Zhou Lian and Wei Pai heard Sui Jingqing's detailed explanation, they mostly talked about Qin Pingan's experiences. Wei Pai accepted the mountain traveling staff and prepared to send it to Cui Dongshan through his MT by Yunshan. This was more appropriate than Zhou Lian sending it as Luopa Mountain. Other than the mountain traveling staff, Sui Jingqing also wrote a secret letter. Qin Pingan told her to tell Zhou Lian and Wei Pai about Senior Cui's words. Sui Jingqing was not willing to tell Zhou Lian and Wei Pai in front of them. It was not that she did not trust Zhou Lian and Wei Pai, it was just her nature. On this point she was very similar to Qin Pingan. Wei Pai received the secret letter again. Sui Jingqing was relieved. Next, before meeting Mr. Cui, who was described as a god by the senior, she only needed to be escorted by a nascent soul sword Immortal eldest senior martial brother in the Aquarius continent. But she planned to stay in Luopa Mountain and Longquan Prefecture for a while. There were many reasons, such as meeting senior's first disciple Pei Qian, visiting the Immortal shops at Oxhorn Mountain Ferry, and Mountain God Wei's MT by Yunshan. How could she not be a guest? This used to be one of the 36 small grotto heavens, Pearl Grotto Heaven. Did she not need to slowly walk around? She could even go to Dali's capital in the north to take a look, and then take the Eternal Spring Palace's ferry back to Oxhorn Mountain Ferry to rest here. Sui Jingqing was led to the house by a cute girl who looked like she was carved out of jade. Wei Pai first went to MT by Yunshan, sent out the mountain traveling staff and the secret letter, and then returned to Zhou Lian's courtyard. Zhou Lian was slowly pacing back and forth thinking about something. Wei Pai did not disturb him and poured himself a cup of tea. For example, the cultivation of a mountain god could be directly seen through the golden body, and the cultivation of a cultivator could be measured by the amount of spiritual energy stored in the qi dwelling. Then in Wei Pai's view, the four people in the picture scroll of Lotus Flower Blessed Land, Nanyuan Kingdom's founding emperor Wei Xian, the devil cult's leader Lu Baixiang, and the female sword fairy Sui Yu, of course, had their own wonderful lives, and also stood at the peak of Lotus Flower Blessed Land. But in terms of state of mind, they were not as perfect and meticulous as Zhou Lian. Born in the top wealthy family, he secretly learned martial arts while reading books. As a young prodigy, he took part in the imperial examination early and patiently compiled history books. After a few years of silence in the officialdom, he officially entered the imperial court. His official career was smooth and he quickly brought glory to his family. Later he turned to Jianghu and wandered around the world. He was even more elegant and had fun, and he even saw the mud of Jianghu at the bottom of the society. Finally, when the mountains and rivers were destroyed, he turned the tide and returned to the imperial court. He threw himself into the battlefield, gave up his invincible martial arts, and only used the identity of a Confucian general to support the chaos of the world. Finally, he returned to Jianghu and turned from a noble son to a rebellious martial arts madman. So, this was the reason why Zhou Xian was still not interested in anything even when he came to the vast world. For Zhou Xian, the world was still the world. It was just a lotus flower-blessed land that had become the vast world. But people's hearts were still the same and they could not change too much. In short, Zhou Xian had never really been interested in anything. Sui Yu would hope to ascend as a sword cultivator. Wei Xian would have the temperament of an emperor. He was ambitious and he tried to rise again. He wanted to control more troops and power than a blessed land sovereign. Liu Baixiang would want to start from a new Jianghu, slowly accumulate resources and finally establish a sect. One day he would break away from Luopa Mountain and establish his own sect. He would look down on the immortals on the mountain as a pure martial artist. The three of them each had their own desires. In the new world they all found their own great Tao. As for Zhou Xian, he had no desires. Zhou Lian's state of mind had long been unrestrained by the great Tao. To put it bluntly, if Zhou Lian were to tear off his face he would be able to eat until he was full. What's more, Zhou Lian was already so proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy and painting, even though he had never paid attention to them. To put it nicely, Zhou Lian, who could be said to be extremely talented, could learn from Sui Yu and cultivate. He could also advance 1,000 miles in a day and break through realms like breaking bamboo. Zhou Lian regained his senses and stopped walking. He smiled and said, "Sorry, I was a little lost in thought." Wei Pai poured him a cup of tea. After Zhou Lian sat down, he gently twisted the porcelain cup and slowly asked, "About the secret purchase of the golden body fragment, how was the discussion with Cui Dongshan?" This was a key secret that Zhou Lian, Wei Pai and Jing Dafeng had discussed. Once Lotus Root blessed land became Luopa Mountain's private property and became a medium-grade blessed land, they would need a large number of mountain deities. The more the better. Because incense in the mortal world was something that Luopa Mountain did not need to spend money on, but was extremely important to a blessed land. But the golden body fragment was directly related to the Dali imperial court. Even if Wei Pai were to speak, it would not be a good thing. Therefore, they needed Cui Dongshan to weigh the scale and do some under-the-table transactions with the southern immortal mountain of Aquarius continent. Even if the Dali imperial court knew about this, they would only turn a blind eye. For Luopa Mountain this was enough. Wei Pai said, "We're still waiting." Wei Pai suddenly laughed. "I believe that after the mountain staff is sent out, your young master's student, who originally had 70 to 80% of his strength, will be full of energy, and will be willing to use 120% of his strength to deal with us." Zhou Lian nodded. "Cui Dongshan, when we deal with him we must be extremely careful." Zhou Lian was still extremely fearful of Cui Dongshan. Because they were the same kind of people. Zhou Lian would definitely not let down his guard because of the complicated relationship between Cui Dongshan and Chen Pingan. Then there was Jing Dafeng, who said that in the near future, there would be a person who was proficient in the rules of the blessed land, coming to Luopa Mountain. This was also a piece of good news. Luopa Mountain did not have an extra grain of grain rain money, but every time this person spoke of the inside story of the blessed land, it was equal to saving Luopa Mountain a sum of grain rain money. Previously, Sun Jiashu had personally climbed the mountain. He was extremely sincere. Old Dragon City's Sun family was willing to take out 300 grain rain money, and only collect interest. Sun Jiashu and his family did not need to share any of the future profits of Lotus Root blessed land. The Fan family would also take out 300 grain rain money, and it was the same. It was not the Fan family patriarch, but a young man called Fan Heir who would be the borrower. But the two families had many different requests. For example, Sun Jiashu proposed that within 50 years, Luopa Mountain had to provide a consecrator for the Sun family, a far travel realm martial artist or a nascent soul stage cultivator. Both were fine. For the Sun family to help once when they were in trouble, it would be nullified. Then there was the Sun family's plan to open up a ferry route, from the southern end of Old Dragon City all the way to the north. The ferry would end at Oxhorn Mountain Ferry and not Dali Capital Region's Eternal Spring Palace. This required Wei Pai and Luopa Mountain to take care of them, and also to help build a relationship with the Dali imperial court. Even with the additional conditions that required both parties to slowly work together, Sun Jiaxu would only collect interest for the money he borrowed, although it guaranteed that Old Dragon City's Sun family would be able to make a profit. But now the Aquarius continent was in a state of chaos, containing countless opportunities to make money. The Sun family had almost emptied their family's assets to bet on Luopa Mountain, which was definitely not the best choice. The real way of doing business was to let the money grow and, like the other families, land in the vast area south of Lakeview Academy and north of Old Dragon City. The interest would grow and the money would grow. According to the situation that was gradually becoming clearer, the Sun family would not only be able to make a profit, but also be on good terms with the Dali imperial court and the new emperor of the Song family. Once Dali annexed a continent, this hidden payment would help the future generations of the Sun family expand their wealth. Zhou Xian suddenly said, "After the shop at the bag shop opens, if nothing unexpected happens, the new emperor of Dali will take the initiative to send you a sum of gold essence copper coins, or a pile of gold fragments. Just accept it, lest the young emperor think too much. When smart people are idle, they like to be suspicious, which is not good. But let's say in advance, relationship is relationship, business is business. Our Luopa Mountain will buy at a low price with your Luopa Mountain." Wei Pai said with a smile, "Of course." Then he added, "If you remove the word low price, it will be better." Wei Pai grandly held the second night banquet to open his own bag shop in Oxhorn Mountain, in addition to earning some immortal money that went against his conscience. In fact, he also had the intention of earning another sum of gold essence copper coins that went against his conscience. Since the great god of Northern Mountain needed to wantonly plunder immortal money to help him break through, how could the Dali imperial court sit idly by? It could even be said that the new emperor of Dali, more than anyone else in the Aquarius continent, hoped that Wei Pai could smoothly enter the upper 5 realms. The bigger the commotion, the better. It would be best if the auspicious signs within a radius of 1,000 miles appeared together. What did this mean? Yi Songhe was the most righteous and the world celebrated. Wei Pai was the only new god of 5 mountains that was conferred by the previous emperor. But Wei Pai was also the mountain god of Dali. He was the most important existence because the capital of Dali was right under the eyes of Wei Pai, the god of Wei Pai. So how to skillfully win over the old minister of the previous dynasty, Wei Pai could easily become a sore point for the new emperor of Dali. Over time, if there was no communication between the two sides, it would become a thorn in the emperor's heart. Then Wei Pai and Mount Pai Yun needed to give the Dali imperial court a way out, so that they could walk comfortably and not stiffly. So when Zhu Lian and Jing Dafeng mentioned this matter, why did Wei Pai hesitate and agree? Because at that time, there were 3 people in the small courtyard, each one better than the other at playing chess. They all took one step and calculated many steps. Wei Pai hesitated for a moment. "You're not going to ask me why I suddenly know about the situation of Lotus Flower Blessed Land?" Zhu Lian waved his hand. "No need to tell me. What can be said? The 3 of us have already told you everything we know. What is not convenient to say, there is no need to ask and answer between the 3 of us. It is meaningless." Wei Pai raised his teacup, tea in place of wine. Zhu Lian hurriedly put his arm around his shoulder and raised his teacup with both hands, smiling flatteringly. "God Wei's toast I dare not accept." After the 2 drank the tea in their cups, Wei Pai smiled. "It is a pity that Brother Dafeng is not here." Zhu Lian reached out and touched the back of his head. "When it comes to being a person, you and I are not as good as him." Wei Pai did not object. After all, Wei Pai was not a person. This was a free advantage to take advantage of Zhu Lian. It was not easy to take advantage of this old chef, be it playing chess or doing business. Wei Pai stood up and smiled. "I won't disturb you from making supper." Zhu Lian nodded and sighed. "At the beginning I was unyielding, but now I am a little guilty. In the future, when my young master returns to Luopa Mountain, I think I will need to go to your place to hide." Wei Bian gloated for a brief moment before disappearing. Zhu Lian got up and went to open the door. There was a charcoal girl with slumped arms, knocking on the door with her head. It should be because she did not wake up the dragon riding alley's right protector. Zhu Lian opened the door. Pei Qian staggered over the threshold and said in a trembling voice, "Old chef, I can't sleep. Can I chat with you?" Zhu Lian closed the door and said with a smile, There's nothing wrong with that. Pei Qian sat on the stool, grimacing, her butt blooming. Tonight it wasn't that she couldn't sleep. She was woken up by the pain and couldn't sleep. She wanted to slap herself in the face. In the past she said that the bedding was her greatest enemy. Didn't it come true now? The light bedding was like a knife when it covered his body. Zhou Xian asked, "Not hungry? Have supper. It'll be quick." Pei Qian shook her head and said sickly, "I don't have an appetite." Zhou Xian asked again, "Something on your mind?" Pei Qian made a sound of acknowledgement but did not speak. Zhou Xian asked, "Are you upset because you owe more and more debts?" Pei Qian nodded and said gloomily, "The old man said I still have a few days to break through the third realm. At that time I can barely have some time to copy books. But it will only be a few days. Soon my hands and feet will be sluggish again. So annoying." Zhou Xian only listened to the charcoal girl talk. He did not interrupt. Pei Qian raised her head and looked at the big jade plate in the sky. "In the past at Dragon Riding Alley, I always thought that one day Master would come home with a whoosh. Now I think of Master coming home, but I am also afraid of him coming home. If Master finds out that I haven't copied books for so many days, he will get angry and kick me out of the sect. What should I do?" The little girl frowned and pouted. Her eyes were filled with tears as she said sadly, "It's not like Master hasn't done such a thing before. When he just left Lotus Flower Blessed Land in a place called the Great Spring Dynasty in Tongyi Continent, he didn't want me even once. Old chef, think about it. Who is Master? Even if his straw sandals are worn out, he will still keep them. How can he abandon me just like that? At that time I was still immature. Master could abandon me and then go back on his word. Now that I am mature, if Master doesn't want me anymore, it means he really doesn't want me anymore." Zhou Xian asked softly, "Are you afraid of this? So you don't dare to grow up?" Pei Qian raised her elbow with difficulty and wiped her face. "How can I not be afraid? What's so good about growing up?" Actually, regarding the matter of copying books, Zhou Xian had explained to Pei Qian before. She must have heard it. So the real reason was something Pei Qian could not say out loud. It was something she kept in her heart. Zhou Xian could roughly guess but did not expose her. Back then, Qin Pingon had told Pei Qian personally that the person he really wanted to bring out of Lotus Flower Blessed Land was Chao Qinglang. At that time, Qin Pingon did not like or even hate Pei Qian, who was at the other extreme of temperament. Moreover, he did not hide it from her. The so-called growth, in Zhou Lian's view, was just more of weighing the pros and cons. Pei Qian was in a very awkward position. It was not that she did not know how to weigh the pros and cons. On the contrary, as an orphan who had suffered greatly, she was best at observing people and calculating the pros and cons. However, after following Qin Pingon, she realized that the things she was best at would only cause her to be further away from Qin Pingon. So she had always been afraid of growing up. She had been secretly imitating Qin Pingon. Pei Qian tried to become the Pei Qian that could gain Qin Pingon's approval. Actually, there was nothing wrong with this. This was because Qin Pingon had enough patience to wait for Pei Qian to grow up slowly. He was more than willing to teach Pei Qian different rules and manners at different stages of life. However, no one expected that Lotus Flower Blessed Land would be divided into 4. After Zhou Lian and Pei Qian entered, they just happened to see that scene. In fact, if Pei Qian had only seen the green-robed youth who seemed to have grown up overnight and appeared with an umbrella, it would have been fine. The problem was that at the very beginning, Pei Qian had seen Qin Pingon holding an umbrella and walking together with Chao Qinglang in the shabby alley in the rain at the entrance of the alley. After arriving at Howren Heaven, she saw a very similar scene in Cui Dongshan's The Long Scroll of Time. It was the straw-sandaled youth and the teacher he respected the most. They were also holding an umbrella and walking side by side in the rain. This was why Pei Qian said that she could lose to anyone but Chao Qinglang. Because Pei Qian was afraid that Chao Qinglang, who had grown up and was extremely outstanding, would take away everything that should have belonged to Chao Qinglang. Pei Qian was afraid that one day in the heavy rain, her master would hold an umbrella and walk side by side with Chao Qinglang. They would gradually disappear into the distance and Qin Pingon would never look back. Then Pei Qian, who was in Luopa Mountain and Howren Heaven, felt like she had returned to the alley entrance of Lotus Flower Blessed Land. She had nothing. The moment she saw Chao Qinglang again in Lotus Flower Blessed Land, Pei Qian felt like she had fallen into an ice cave. Her hands and feet were cold and her heart was filled with killing intent. However, after finding an opportunity to kill Chao Qinglang, she was destined to lose her master. She had to take the initiative to grow up and surpass Chao Qinglang. Pei Qian, who had been influenced by Qin Pingon, walked out of Lotus Flower Blessed Land and stood in front of Luopa Mountain's bamboo house again. She chose the latter. Zhou Xian carefully considered his words and asked, "If your master returned to Luopa Mountain and saw Chao Qinglang and liked him very much, would you be very sad?" Pei Qian thought for a moment. As long as he liked me the most, he would be very happy. If he liked me as much as he liked Chao Qinglang, he would be a little unhappy. If he liked Chao Qinglang more than me, he would be very sad. Zhou Xian smiled and said, "Then you can rest assured. 1, 2, 3 situations I dare not say much. You can at least guarantee 2 and fight for 1. Pei Qian rolled her eyes. "You are not my master. What's the use of talking?" Although she said so, in fact she was a little happy. Zhou Xian held back his laughter. "It's up to you to believe it or not. But after practicing martial arts for so long and owing so much, you still haven't broken through 3 realms. This is a little inappropriate." Pei Qian sighed heavily, wrinkling her little face that seemed to be not so dark anymore. "Yes, the old man also said that my aptitude is not good, not even as good as my master. Isn't that nonsense? How can I compare with my master? I'm so worried." Zhou Lian's heart trembled. He was just joking with Pei Qian. He didn't expect that the old senior was even more vicious and merciless. How could he say such a shameless thing that his conscience was eaten by a dog? Zhou Lian rubbed between his eyebrows. He wasn't too willing to speak. The bottleneck of 3 realms for a pure martial artist. That was the first and could even be said to be the greatest barrier that determined the ultimate height of a martial artist. The significance was no different from a peak martial artist breaking through a great threshold and successfully becoming a 10th realm martial artist. If it was a normal person who taught martial arts, such a shocking speed of breaking through realms could be explained away as the foundation was not solid enough. They would not have the extravagant hope of being the strongest. 1 step was papier-mâché and every step was papier-mâché. But that person in the bamboo house. In his hands, there seemed to be no solid foundation in martial arts in the world. There was only a stronger foundation. Pei Qian suddenly raised her head and asked, "Old chef, what realm are you?" Zhou Lian smiled and said, "Realm 8, Far Travel Realm." Pei Qian lowered her head, her fingers moving slightly as she calculated. She sighed again and raised her head again. Her face was full of disappointment. "Old chef, then I won't be able to catch up to you for many years." Zhou Lian's smile stiffened. "It seems so." Zhou Lian then asked doubtfully, "You don't know what realm your master is at?" Pei Qian looked at Zhou Lian like she was looking at an idiot. "My master is now at realm 6. Zhou Lian became more and more confused. "Isn't young master also 2 realms lower than me? Why don't you catch up to your master's realm first?" Pei Qian's face was blank, as if saying that Zhou Lian's brain was too big to understand. She shook her head and said in an old-fashioned manner, "Old chef, you're talking in your sleep. Wouldn't my master's realm have doubled?" Zhou Lian was completely convinced. Pei Qian shook her head in a great mood. She suddenly stood up and with a tap of her foot, she floated onto the top of the wall and silently climbed up the roof. Then she stepped onto the raised eaves and looked towards the north. She probably still didn't know what it meant to shock ghosts and gods with a punch. She probably wouldn't need to stick a talisman to her forehead very soon. Zhou Lian suddenly remembered something and his expression changed. After a moment of silence he asked seriously, "Pei Qian, you burped twice before. What did the senior say to you?" Pei Qian just looked towards the north and said angrily, "He said I was asking for a beating." In fact, that old man had a look of disdain, saying that her martial realm was like an ant moving house and a turtle crawling. But this kind of words it was better for her to know. Otherwise, with old chef's big mouth, maybe the whole Luopa mountain would know tomorrow. Zhou Lian slapped his forehead. He really regretted letting Pei Qian learn martial arts so quickly. Zhou Lian didn't need to think to know that when Qin Pingon returned to Luopa mountain and found Pei Qian's strange state, he, Jing Dafeng and Wei Pai would not be able to escape. They would definitely be scolded badly. Maybe in the eyes of outsiders, Luopa Mountain had many strange people, but in the eyes of the people of Luopa Mountain, Pei Qian was probably the strangest. Of course, Qin Pingon was even stranger. All the masters in the world would be happy to have an enlightened disciple like Pei Qian. But Qin Pingon was different. It wasn't that he didn't know how to calculate. On the contrary, this young man who had been an accountant at Bookslip Lake for 3 years was the best at calculating. He only hoped that there would be someone by his side, even if it was only one person, who could raise the grass on his shoulders and make the willows rustle in his carefree years. After that, the sky was high and the land was wide and the road was far away. Pei Qian lowered his head and said, "Old chef, I'm leaving." Julian nodded. Pei Qian jumped high, landed on the wall and leaped, disappearing in the blink of an eye. It was written in the book that Cui Dongshan had read. Leaping onto the roof, the tiles were silent. When the moon was bright, he left like a bird. "5:30. A young woman who was returning home from another continent left the Oxhorn Mountain Ferry and walked out of the mountain. She walked towards the small town where the Huaihuang County government was located. She passed by the Jinzhu Mountain that looked like a small hill. She took a few more glances at it before entering the town. She first went to her family's old house that was not far from the Jinzhu Mountain. Back then, an old beast from Xingyang Mountain stepped on the roof, so the family of 4 could only move to a relative's house. Later, her mother nagged her for a long time about paying for the renovation. She took out the house key and fetched 2 buckets of water from the nearby well. She carefully cleaned the house inside and out before locking the door and going to the deserted Yang family shop. Business was difficult, so there were only 2 workers left in the shop. The young man was called Shi Lingshan, and his senior sister was called Su Dian. They were in charge of the medicine shop. Shi Lingshan was napping on the counter, while Su Dian sat on a bench and breathed silently. After breaking through the bottleneck of the 3rd realm, she received a comment from her senior brother, Xing Dafeng, saying that it was not vulgar and would help improve the quality of her heroic courage in the future. He also advised her to go to the ruins of the ancient battlefield after reaching the 5th realm. Refining her soul, there would be twice the result with half the effort, and it would be especially suitable for her cultivation in the 6th realm. However, Su Dian did not feel too happy. Instead, she felt a deep sense of loss. This was because she knew that the bottleneck of the 3rd realm was not only a great barrier, but also a great opportunity. She had dreamed of becoming the strongest, but in the end she was not fated to be the strongest. She could only place her hopes on the current 4th realm. This made Su Dian, who had a strong desire to win, become even more taciturn. Every day he would practice martial arts to the point that he was close to going crazy. Her martial arts cultivation was divided into 3 types: day training, night training, and dream training. The last one was the most mysterious. The first 2 had the best effect when the sun was shining and the moon was full. The dream training required her to light up 3 incense sticks every night before she went to sleep. Then she could enter all kinds of strange dreams, such as fighting in pairs, being trapped in a battlefield, dying instantly, or struggling on the brink of death. After the dream training, Su Dian would not be dispirited the next day. When she woke up at dawn every day, she would always be refreshed and would never delay her day or night training. Shi Lingshan looked like he was taking a nap, but he was actually cultivating hard. Compared to senior sister Su's cultivation method, the young man's cultivation method was simpler. It was called wading in water. Walking in the river of time, he tempered his body and soul. Su Dian didn't know his master's true identity, nor did he know what his master's cultivation level was. However, Su Dian was certain of one thing. His and his junior brother's paths of cultivation were definitely unusual. Nowadays there were many immortals coming and going in Huaihuang County. In the mountains to the west, there were many demons and monsters in human form. There were constantly local disciples of the small town or Lu clan's felons who were taken in as inner disciples by cultivators. Su Dian guessed that other than Sage Wan Jiao's Dragon Spring Sword sect, there shouldn't be anyone who could compare to her and her junior brother. Su Dian opened her eyes and looked at the unfamiliar customer outside the door. Shi Lingshan, who was lying on the counter, was still breathing deeply and didn't move at all. Su Dian was half an apprentice and half an odd job worker at the dragon kiln. In fact, he did hard labor. The dragon kiln's porcelain was the most important thing in the small town since ancient times. It was the Song clan's official kiln that was used for imperial porcelain. Su Dian, who was nicknamed Rouge, relied on her uncle's identity to make a living there in the early years. There were many taboos and rules when it came to porcelain. As a woman, she could only do manual labor like chopping firewood, burning charcoal, and moving soil. Every time the kiln was opened, she couldn't go near the entrance of the kiln, otherwise she would be expelled from the dragon kiln. Therefore, Su Dian wasn't familiar with the local people of the small town. As for her junior brother Shi Lingshan, he was a child born in Peach Leaf Alley. Since he was young, he was used to playing with his neighbors and people of the same age from the big families of Fulu Street. He was also unfamiliar with the shabby alleys like Mud Bottle Alley and Apricot Blossom Alley. At most, he was familiar with places like Dragon Rider Alley that were filled with miscellaneous goods. The slender young woman looked at Su Dian and said softly with a smile, "You are Su Dian, right?" Su Dian had a good impression of this guest. She looked soft and weak, just like the rouge and face powder that her uncle had been talking about when he was alive. Su Dian nodded and stood up. "Do you want to buy medicine?" The young woman shook her head. "I'm looking for someone. My father used to be a waiter here. My younger brother is Li Huai. He often came here to play when he was young. Have you heard of him?" Su Dian's expression changed slightly. Li Huai. Was he the young man in a scholarly robe who seemed to have eaten 100 bears' heart and leopard's guts? Why would such a carefree young man have such a gentle and soft sister? The woman in front of her looked like a willow in spring. Her voice was pleasant and her face was kind. She wasn't the kind of beauty that men would be attracted to at first glance, but she was very good-looking. Even a beautiful woman like Su Dian thought she was beautiful. Su Dian asked softly, "Are you looking for my master?" The woman nodded with a smile. Su Dian was a little embarrassed. At this moment, old Yang appeared at the door of the shop in the backyard for the first time. He lifted the curtain with his pipe and said with a smile, "You're here. Come in." Li Lu walked into the backyard. Old Yang sat on the steps and continued to smoke. The woman casually picked a stool and sat down. Old man Yang said, "The matter of the newly acquired blessed land in Luopa Mountain, just say it. There's no need to avoid it. It seems to involve a lot of people, but in fact it's a matter that complies with the rules. As a big shot who can reach the heavens, he still has this bit of tolerance. Your current identity is a restraint, but it's still useful." Li Lu nodded. "You asked Jing Dafeng to call me here. It's not just about this, right?" Old Yang nodded. "It just so happens that Wan Jiao came to find me. It's also related to the blessed land. You can explain it all together. The things are still with me. Go back to Luopa Mountain and then go to Spiritual Beauty Mountain." Li Lu's eyes were deep. Old Yang said with a smile, "You don't even have the Tao. Why talk about the battle of the great Tao? Isn't it a joke? I think you should forget about the old grudges between you and her. But I don't think the two of you will listen to my advice. Otherwise back then, forget it. Let's not talk about old things. If we really want to fuss about it, everyone has done it. Anyway, if the two of you really want to compete, it's not now." A master of the pugilistic world, the fire god, was sitting high up. It was nothing more than the collapse of the great Tao, the change of the mountains and rivers, and the change of their physical bodies. As for why he, a felon with the highest seniority and status in the world, was still able to survive until today, he had to ask 3 people, 2 gods. Of the 2 gods, one decided why swordsmen had the greatest killing power, but it was extremely difficult for them to enter the legendary 14th realm. The other decided why the path of martial arts in the world was a broken path. At the same time, it also decided why the military cultivators among the Qi cultivators could be close to being untainted by karma. Li Lu suddenly said, "I don't think it will succeed." Old Yang sneered. "Who would have thought that those ants would reach the top? Would it succeed?" Li Lu remained silent. Indeed, it was just as old man Yang had said. If they really wanted to fuss about it, everyone had done it. Old Yang knocked the ground with his pipe and shook out a small temple surrounded by clouds. It rolled on the ground and finally landed. A small incense man ran out from inside and dragged 2 large plaques with both hands. They were actually a jade token and a seal. Li Lu glanced at the 2 items and smiled. Lu Xianyang, who was borrowed by the Melochin family for 30 years, will definitely enter the Dragon Spring Sword sect? Old Yang said. Wan Ju thinks that the possibility of Lu Xianyang returning is not high. In fact, the chances are still very high. The incense man ran all the way to Li Lu's feet. Li Lu picked up the keys to the 2 grotto heavens and blessed lands. She was not interested. It was just a broken old mountain and river. She was different from Wan Xiu, Li Er, Jing Dafeng and Fan Junmao. As for the sage Shou Ju of the Lakeview Academy, Sun Jiaxu of the Old Dragon City, and the little girl Cui from the small sect in the paradise of the northern continent, they could not be compared to her. The 8 goddesses of the skeleton beach city of murals left behind the painted fairyland residence in the hemp sect. It was also one of the broken mountains and rivers. It could even be considered as one of Li Lu's summer residences. Therefore, when the rain goddess saw Li Lu, she would feel uneasy. She only felt that when she met Li Lu, she was like an official of the secular dynasty meeting the heavenly official of the Ministry of Appointments. Actually, this was not an illusion of the rain goddess. It was because the world was like this. The 8 goddesses of the mural city of murals had responsibilities that were roughly equivalent to the 6 ministers in the temples of the mortal world. However, they were only similar. In fact, the 8 goddesses had more power and responsibilities. They could patrol the heaven and earth, restrict, supervise, and impeach the gods of various departments. It could be said that their positions were inferior. Compared to the others who were led by Old Yang step by step on the ancient path, Li Lu's biggest difference was that she did not need to be enlightened at all. Because she was born with knowledge. Many immortal clans with the word sect had to spend a lot of resources to find the reincarnation of their patriarch after their patriarch had passed away. For example, the ancestor of the Tong Yi sect sent people down the mountain to find his mother. However, even if they found her, she might not be able to remember her past life. On the path of cultivation, having a good innate talent did not mean that one could definitely return to the peak. After casually putting away the jade tablet and seal, Li Lu thought for a moment and sighed, "You still don't want us to bring up old scores. If one Qin Pingon was not enough, then there was another Li Huai. If that was not enough, then there was another Lu Xianyang." It was a battle of water and fire that was hidden very deeply. It was Qin Pingon who temporarily replaced Li Lu to compete with Wan Xiu. This was because the one who should have gotten the lucky chance of the mud fish was Qin Pingon, not Gu Kan. Why did Wan Xiu fall in love with Qin Pingon? Now things might become more and more complicated. However, in the beginning, it was definitely not as simple as Qin Pingon's clear state of mind that made Wan Xiu feel clean. Instead, it was when Wan Xiu saw Qin Pingon. She was like an old glutton who saw the most delicious food in the world. He could not look away. Li Huai was Li Lu's younger brother and also Qi Jingquan's disciple. By chance, Qin Pingon had served as Li Huai's Dao protector. If Li Lu wanted to bring up old scores with Wan Xiu, she would first have to kill Qin Pingon, who was naturally close to water, so that she could occupy the Great Dao. However, Li Huai would definitely not let this happen. And Li Lu was indeed unwilling to make Li Huai sad. But this was not safe enough. Therefore, Old Yang wanted to add some reasonable possibilities for Lu Xianyang to return to the Dragon Spring Sword sect. For example, a grotto heaven that was not included in the 36 would complement Lu Xianyang's ancestral sword manual. With Qin Pingon and Lu Xianyang around, the relationship between Luopa Mountain and the Dragon Spring Sword sect would only become closer and closer. Old Yang did not deny anything. His eyes were cold. "Everyone has done it. The 2 of you have done it especially." Li Lu was neither afraid nor guilty. She looked up at the sky and said, "Probably." Old Yang suddenly said, "Although to you all kinds of mud can be dispersed with a wave of your clothes, you still have to be careful. Otherwise, one day the inconspicuous mud like that seal will cause you all to suffer greatly." Li Lu shook her head. "You don't have to say these words to me. I know what I'm doing." Then Li Lu smiled and looked at the old man. Old Yang laughed involuntarily as though he was finding an excuse for himself. "After sitting in the cage for 10,000 years, can't I find some fun to relieve myself of my boredom?" Li Lu held back her laughter. "My father is still all right. After all, he has to leave some martial fate for the Aquarius continent. But my mother doesn't need to go to the North continent." Old Yang kept quiet, but his face was not good. Upon thinking about the shrew who seemed to have to eat a few kilograms of arsenic every day, he was not in a good mood. She was an abominable plaything. The fly feces in the incense burner, even looking at it would dirty his eyes. Li Huai and his mother were different from his father Li Er and his sister Li Lu. They were not on the same path. The mother and daughter were just ordinary people. Of course Li Huai was not fake. But he was definitely not ordinary. There was no such dog shit in the world that seemed to be lining up for him to step on. The Tong Yi continents Mount Taiping Huang Ting and the Divine Grandeur sects He Xiao Yang were both reputed to be the most blessed in their respective continents. However, compared to Li Huai's unrivaled dog shit luck, it seemed that the latter was even more incomprehensible. Huang Ting and He Xiaoliang still needed to think about how to hold on to their fortune, to prevent it from being intertwined with misfortune. But do you think Li Huai needs that? He was the kind of person whose fortune took the initiative to come to him. Maybe he had to worry that the things he bought were too heavy and ugly. So old Yang could make an exception for Li Huai and give him more. And he could not do any business with him. After all, the old man really liked this little brat. Li Zhu Grotto Heaven had been around for a long time. There were very few people who could enter the backyard of the Yang family medicine shop. A child like Li Huai was rarely seen. As for the women, because they were too ordinary, the old man could not be bothered with them. If not, why not try Peach Leaf Alley's Xie or Clay Bottle Alley's Chaoxi? How could they walk out of Li Zhu Grotto Heaven? Old Yang was silent for a moment. Qin Pingon began to quietly investigate the natal porcelain. He was very secretive and did not leave any trace. Li Lu did not have any feelings about this. She knew a little about the inside story. It was an extremely complicated network on the mountain. Of course, the Yang family medicine shop could not get rid of it. It was just that they did things according to the rules and did not deliberately target Qin Pingon. They just shared the spoils with the Song clan. The natal porcelain was made by old Yang in the beginning. It could even be said that the rise of the Dali dynasty was due to this business in Li Zhu Grotto Heaven. That was why it could slowly rise. Therefore, old Yang's praise of the young Cui Dong's spirit was the highest recognition in the world. It could be said that other than old Yang, only Cui Dong and Cui Dongshan could reach this level. The Ma couple who lived in Apricot Blossom Alley but had the ability to control the dragon kiln, were also Ma Kushuan's parents. They had a lot to do with the breaking of Qin Pingon's natal porcelain. Ma Lanhua, who had been promoted from River Granny to River God in Dragon Whisker River, had never had a golden temple, let alone worship incense. The old woman was vicious, but only in this matter did she have a conscience. She even tried to stop her son and daughter-in-law. However, the couple was blinded by greed and the old woman did not succeed. Ma Kushuan once woke up in the middle of the night and knew a little of the truth. Therefore he was particularly concerned about Qin Pingon, who had been pretending to be stupid in his early years. The Dali Empress, the current Empress Dowager and the previous emperor did it for Song Jisun and for the throne of Dali. The imperial tutor, Cui Dong, took advantage of the situation and played a game of chess with Qi Jingchun. If only looking at the result, Cui Dong did indeed play a divine hand. If the end of the era comes, who do you think will be the most miserable of the 3 sects and 100 schools? Li Lu said, Taoism. Once there is no way to ascend and no spiritual energy, all the cultivation methods in the world will become dragon-slaying skills, and Taoism will be in the most difficult situation. The tranquility and inaction of the great Tao may become inaction of inaction. For Taoism, this is very likely to be the earliest separation between heaven and earth, God and man. On the other hand, Confucianism and Buddhism can still pass down the torch and preach for thousands of years. It is just that the light of the torch is not as bright as before. Old Yang nodded. That is why eldest brother Dao is anxious. That's why Daoist's third brother personally protected eldest senior brother. He went to Black Pearl Grotto Heaven and became a fortune teller who set up a stall to keep an eye on Qi Jingchun. Li Lu asked, why didn't Mr. Qi use the hairpin that his teacher gave him? Old Yang said, that is the key item of the smelly Taoist sect master. Of course the old scholar was kind. At first even I didn't know the origin of the hairpin. Qi Jingchun probably didn't notice it at first. Later, when Qi Jingchun resisted the heavenly tribulation, the hairpin's strangeness was slightly revealed. Of course, the smelly Taoist sect master also had the intention of disgusting him. Unfortunately, Qi Jingchun didn't want to go from one chessboard to another. Death is death, so he cut off all the threads. Old Man Yang revealed a look of reminiscence. It was this kind of person who overturned our world back then. The old man smiled. Don't think that the world is in a mess now. In fact, when a disaster comes, there will be many people like him who will stand up. This is the result of Confucianism's education. Who always likes to say that the people are ignorant. It is the people on the mountain and then it is the scholars. In fact, the most powerful aspect of the Confucian school is that they do not know what is good for them, and the most powerful aspect of the Confucian school is that they do not know what is good for them, but they do know that they are evil when they do evil. That is the most powerful aspect of the Confucian school. Children take care of old age, parents teach their children, monarch, minister, master, disciple, family, friends, neighbors. The Confucian way of the world is like burning porcelain. The old man thought for a while. Previously, Li Huai sent some books to the shop. I flipped to one of the sentences, cold into the bones of the mountain, the grass and trees are thin. How is it? Isn't it very interesting? Why would a rotten person like Ma Lanhua of Apricot Blossom Lane stop her son and daughter-in-law from seeking money and committing murder? This is the complicated human nature. It is the rules of Confucianism that are not on paper to restrain people's hearts. Many principles have long been in the hearts of the people in the world. Li Lu asked curiously, what knowledge was Mr. Qi studying in Lizhu Grotto Heaven for 60 years? Old Yang said, of course there are hundreds of schools of thought in the 3 sections. Qi Jingquan's studies are worthy of the praise of seeing everything at a glance. However, he focused on studying 3 kinds of knowledge in private: calculation, meridian, and law. Li Lu sighed. He was just a scholar. Why did he have to come here? Old Yang took out some tobacco. When Li Lu saw this, she smiled knowingly. It should have been given to the old man by his younger brother, Li Huai. The reason was simple. It was because the tobacco looked cheap. After chatting for a while, Li Lu stood up and disappeared in a flash. She changed her mind and went to Xianxia Mountain first, then to Luopa Mountain. On the cliff of Xianxia Mountain from top to bottom, there were 4 big words, Tian Kai Xianxiu. A woman in green with a ponytail sat on the first horizontal line of the word Tian, as if she was sitting high on the railing of the sky, overlooking the world on the ground. She ate the pastries slowly. After Li Lu appeared beside her, Wan Xiu still did not turn her head. Li Lu squatted on the ground and looked into the distance. She threw the 2 things over. Wan Xiu caught them and put away the pastry towel. Li Lu said, a grotto heaven, paddy field grotto heaven. A blessed land, Hayes blessed land. It is slightly inferior to the 10 major grotto heavens and the 36 minor grotto heavens. The blessed land is a ready-made medium-level blessed land. It is neither good nor bad. If you spend some money, there is hope for it to become a high-class blessed land. However, there is no one in the blessed land, only the spirits of mountains and lakes and the spirits of plants and flowers. Because the old man doesn't like to deal with people, you should know. According to the agreement, the old man will ask you to do 2 things in the future, and then you will decide according to your mood whether to do it or not and how to do it. Wan Xiu spread out her hands and looked down. One was a jade tablet, and the other was engraved with the words, not the azure dragon as the water supervisor. The land becomes a ravine and the water becomes a field. It was the paddy field grotto heaven, also known as the green rice grotto heaven. The other was a seal, and the words time is short in the world, Hayes is abundant here were engraved on the side. It was the Hayes blessed land. The blessed land was in the land, in the people, in the heavenly materials and earthly treasures, and the grotto heaven was in the cultivation. This was the literal meaning of the difference between heaven and earth. Of course, the best situation was for a sect to have both a grotto heaven and a blessed land. For example, the Xinhua sect had both the Qingtan blessed land and a minor grotto heaven. However, it was not among the 36 grotto heavens such as the Dragon Palace grotto heaven and the Dragon Palace grotto heaven, and its quality was not good enough. However, a minor grotto heaven was a minor grotto heaven after all. Compared to a blessed land with abundant spiritual qi, it had many more mysteries in addition to more spiritual qi. For example, there was the aura of the great Tao and some golden objects that had been washed and accumulated by the passage of time. A small object could be full of brilliance. The paddy field grotto heaven had some miraculous features, so to a certain extent, it was suitable for Lu Xianyang's sword practice in his dream. In fact, the old man had a more suitable grotto heaven for that sword manual. However, it was not suitable for him to take it out for the time being. When doing business with others, One should never give it to others without giving it away. It could not be sold at a high price. Wan Xiu furrowed her brows, asking, "You don't have a fragment secret realm of fire property?" Li Lu said, "Even if the old man had one, he wouldn't give it to you. If you dare to accept it, your father will give it back. I won't make an extra trip for this kind of thing." Wan Xiu nodded, saying, "Thank you." Li Lu did not respond. Wan Xiu took out the pastries wrapped in the embroidered handkerchief again, asking, "Do you want to eat it?" Li Lu hesitated for a moment, then picked up a piece of pastry and put it into her mouth. Wan Xiu smiled happily and then said, "You can eat it again before I beat you to death in the future." Li Lu said with a smile, "I eat the pastry and you eat me. Anyway, you eat it. It's a good deal." Wan Xiu put away the pastry and looked into the distance with a smile, saying, "But it may be you who eats me. I think it's good this way. There are not so many restrictions. I can eat whatever I want. Boil water, boil the river, boil the sea, and everything can be eaten." Wan Xiu asked, "I don't remember what happened in the past. Who won the last time we fought?" Li Lu said indifferently, "Both lost." Li Lu asked, "Those 12 nominal disciples of the Dragon Spring Sword sect are obviously pawns planted by others. Why did you deliberately turn a blind eye to them?" Wan Xiu said with a blank face, "Others put a few ants in the chicken coop. Do I need to care?" Li Lu laughed. "Poor ants. Among them, Xieling was probably the most pitiful." Wan Xiu asked casually, "Didn't you meet any acquaintances in the North Continent?" Li Lu said, "In a place called the Ghost Valley in the Skeleton Beach I passed by, but I didn't deliberately say hello. Anyway, we will meet at the Lion Peak in the future." Wan Xiu said, "Oh, you don't know how to be a good person." Li Lu sneered, "Go to the Xianxia blessed land and have a fight? No, I will obviously lose, and it's a money-losing business. If I fight, the spiritual energy of the blessed land will be scattered, and the great demons will die. It's boring." Wan Xiu shook her head and said, "With your temper, I didn't beat you to death back then. It means that my temper was really good in the past." Li Lu leaned back and put his hands under his head. "That's quite good." Wan Xiu glanced at the sky. There were 2 people flying in the wind towards the south. She glanced at them and didn't care. A man came to the ferry of Oxhorn Mountain on his family's ferry. Beside him was a maidservant named Yara. The 2 of them flew directly to Luopa Mountain. He had the sword token made by the Dragon Spring Sword sect. The last time he visited Luopa Mountain, he bought it from a local Immortal mansion. At this moment it was hanging on his waist. He couldn't rely on his identity to buy and sell at the original price. It had nothing to do with morality. It was just that, if the price was doubled, the other party would be willing to sell. Even so, it was just a grain rain money. When he reached the foot of the mountain, he landed. He shouted loudly, "Brother Gale." A stooped man who was basking in the sun on a bench at the entrance of the house immediately stood up and ran over. He said warmly, Brother Zhou Fei is here." Beside Jiang Shangzhen stood a beautiful young woman. It was Yi who had come out of the lotus blossom blessing. After seeing it, Xing Dafeng sighed and said, "Drowning to death." Jiang Shangzhen asked, "Can we go up the mountain?" Xing Dafeng nodded and said, "Sure, but recently our Luopa mountain has been tight on money, so there's a new mountain rule. If you want to go up the mountain, you have to pay a small sum of money. Since it's Brother Zhou Fei, then I'll be shameless. I'll be biased this time and not follow the rules. Brother Zhou Fei, just give it as you see fit. In any case, with your status here, you almost became half a family member of our Luopa mountain." Jiang Shangzhen chuckled and took out a grain rain money and placed it in Xing Dafeng's hand. Xing Dafeng kept it in his sleeve. No, it's too much." Yi stared at the shameless hunchback. She was a smart girl, but she couldn't quite wrap her head around it. Xing Dafeng accompanied Jiang Shangzhen up the mountain and asked, "Why are you here this time?" Jiang Shangzhen smiled and said, "I am here to express my gratitude to your Luopa mountain. Now, my calligraphy lake has an additional jade pure realm sword cultivator as a consecrator. It is all thanks to your mountain master. It is all thanks to him. Also, I heard that Mountain God Wei is holding a second night feast. I missed it both times. I feel really bad about it, so I have to personally go. One to express my gratitude, one to apologize. I have to make it up." A new sect had appeared in Calligraphy Lake. It was called True Realm Sect. This was a big matter that everyone in Aquarius continent knew about. If not for the noise of horse hooves on the continent, the cultivators on the mountain would definitely talk about it for a long time. True Realm Sect's Tong Yi continent was a subsidiary sect of the number 1 Immortal sect, Jade Grey sect. Head consecrator Lu Lao Qing, the only upper 5 realms cultivator in Aquarius continent. Other than that, there was also true monarch Lu Jimao from Azure Gorge Island. There was also a group of powerful cultivators who came from Jade Gui sect to Calligraphy Lake. Now there was a female sword Immortal Shui Kai from North Continent. She became a consecrator in name. It was a huge commotion. Instantly, the number of gazes on Aquarius Continent's mountain increased. They were curious if the local snake and the river dragon would fight on the stage. If there were some undercurrents under the table, it would not be as exciting as a life-and-death battle between 2 great cultivators. Sect Master Xian of Divine Grandeur sect was a Realm 12 heavenly monarch. He also received an immortal weapon from the sect master of an orthodoxy. Moreover, Divine Grandeur sect also had the support of an upper sect in the central divine continent. Xian's junior brother seemed to hold an important position in the upper sect. But according to Aquarius continent's cultivators, True Realm sect would definitely carefully expand their territory in the next 100 years. Great Li Song clan would not allow the Aquarius continent to have a sect that was too big to handle. In fact, True Realm sect did abide by the rules. Even when dealing with the many islands in Calligraphy Lake, other than the bloody Iron Fist in the early days, where those who complied would prosper and those who disobeyed would perish. Now it was stable and peaceful. Some smart cultivators and islands had their own gains. They realized that after Lu Jimao's reorganization without mentioning the rules of the sect, the strength and wealth of their islands had increased. The most interesting thing was that the most lawless and chaotic cultivators in the Aquarius continent seemed to have turned into immortal scribes overnight, and they were all immortal scribes of a clan with the surname, Zhong, in the title of immortal scribes. During this time, Pearl Hairpin Island tried to move out of Calligraphy Lake. True Realm sect specially allocated a few islands with mountains and rivers, but they did not decide who would belong to them. A certain great cultivator of True Realm sect suddenly went into seclusion and did not appear. Zhou Xian received Jiang Shangzhen and they chatted happily. Jiang Shangzhen took out 2 priceless magic treasures as gifts for the 2-night banquets. He troubled Zhou Xian to pass them to Wei Pai of Cloud-Splitting Mountain. In addition, Jiang Shangzhen had prepared 2 immortal treasures as gifts for the young master of Luopa Mountain to win a pure Jade Realm cultivator for True Realm sect. Zhou Xian said that a pure Jade Realm sword cultivator was a sword immortal, not to mention a sword immortal from North Continent. It was unreasonable for Zhou Fei and his brother to only give 2 treasures. 3 was more reasonable. Jiang Shangzhen, who was sitting on the stone bench in the small courtyard, slapped his thigh and said that he had forgotten about this. So he took out 2 treasures. Yet could not bear to look at it. After leaving Lotus Flower Blessed Land, she had seen Jiang Shangzhen's seemingly domineering but actually scheming methods in Jade Grey sect. She had also followed Jiang Shangzhen to Cloud Cave Blessed Land. She had also seen Jiang Shangzhen's coldness and ruthlessness. He killed those unruly earth immortals of Blessed Land without batting an eyelid as if he was breaking the necks of a few chicks. Finally, when they arrived at the Book Slip Lake, although Jiang Shangzhen never gave any specific orders, as if he was a hands-off boss who did not care about anything, everyone had to do everything. Crow, who was born in the Devil sect and was familiar with the operations of a large sect, could see the invisible brand of Jiang Shangzhen's conduct. So she became more and more curious. Did that young banished immortal surnamed Qin make Jiang Shangzhen treat him so seriously? Besides, Qin Pingon was not on her own mountain now. Her was no longer the frog at the bottom of the well in Lotus Flower Blessed Land. She had already seen the scenery at the highest point of the entire Tong Yi continent. Jing Dafeng looked and was happy. Mount Grey Mist, Mount Cinnabar, Mount Wuxia, and the back of Jellyfish. The winning items of the 4 subsidiary mountains of Luopa Mountain were all available. And the cleverest thing about Brother Zhou Fei was that these 4 extraordinary winning items could be used as auxiliary items in the future. In other words, as long as Luopa Mountain found a more suitable immortal treasure to suppress the mountains and rivers of those mountains, the present timely help would automatically become icing on the cake. Of course, The reason why the sect master of True Realm sect could be so clever was because of an important premise. Money. But that was to be expected. That Cloud Cave blessed land was a good place that even those arrogant cultivators of the Central Plains divine continent would want to go there for. It was also the main source of income for the entire Jade Grey sect. So Zhou Xian killed Zhou Fei's pig. One was willing to hit and one was willing to be hit. Everyone was happy. It was estimated that this warm-hearted brother Zhou Fei would complain that Zhou Lian did not stab him with enough knives and not fast enough. Since they had come to Flattery Mountain, Luopa Mountain, the two sides naturally had to compete in Dao techniques. On this trip to Luopa Mountain, Jiang Shangzhen, who had a card up his sleeve, had once again admitted defeat. Because Zhou Lian had a trump card, which was Qin Pinggan's first disciple, Pei Qian, saying that his realm would double. It was the final word. Jiang Shangzhen was impressed. Felt uncomfortable listening at the side. The two sides finally started to talk about serious matters. Was very reserved. Because that hunchbacked man's gaze really made her feel sick. But when they occasionally looked at each other, the other's gaze really could not be said to be disgusting. This made her feel somewhat helpless. Made up her mind to never come to Luopa Mountain again. I want 20% of the profits of Lotus Root Blessed Land. There is no time limit, it is permanent. Jiang Shangzhen stretched out 2 fingers. My conditions are: first, True Realm sect will first lend Luopa Mountain 1,000 grains of grain rain money. After becoming a mid-grade blessed land, we will borrow another 2,000. After becoming a high-grade blessed land, we will take out another 3,000. There is no interest. But for the 3 sums of grain rain money, Qin Pinggan and Luopa Mountain must repay True Realm sect within 100 years, 500 years and 1,000 years respectively, otherwise there will be an additional price. As for whether to use money to repay the debt or borrow people to repay the debt, we can discuss it later, let's not talk about it for now. Second, I will transfer people from Cloud Cave Blessed Land to Lotus Root Blessed Land to help Luopa Mountain manage all kinds of affairs. Third, I can also take out 6 islands at the border of Book Slip Lake, not to rent but directly give them to Luopa Mountain. Zhou Lian smiled but did not speak. Jiang Shangzhen was not in a hurry. Zhou Lian suddenly said, "Now, immortal money is the most valuable and people are the least valuable. But for a long time it is hard to say. Brother Zhou Fei's Cloud Cave Blessed Land is vast and rich in resources, of course it is very powerful. Our Lotus Root Blessed Land size is far from Cloud Cave Blessed Land, but in terms of people, there are 20 million in Nanyuan Kingdom and 40 million in the other 3 kingdoms, including Songlai Kingdom. It is not a small number." Jiang Shangzhen shook his head and waved his sleeve, immediately enveloping a small world. He said slowly, "If it were an outsider, perhaps our old sect master Sun would believe it. Unfortunately, I happen to be a banished immortal from Lotus Root Blessed Land, so I can roughly guess the old sect master's methods. Therefore, outside of Nanyuan Kingdom, in the territory of these paper men and paper paste, in the short term, the souls of the people are fragmented and thin. The fate of the mountains and rivers is also extremely sparse, almost negligible. We can only rely on the real Nanyuan Kingdom to share and make up for it. Therefore, all the people and things outside of Nanyuan Kingdom are really worthless now, not even a bit. We can only wait. In the long term they will become more and more valuable." That was the beautiful scene that Qin Pinggan wanted to see the most. Qin Pinggan left the county town and continued to walk on the territory of the Fufu Kingdom. He did not have the jade hairpin or the bamboo hat. He only carried the bamboo box, wore a green robe and traveled alone. On this day Qin Pinggan entered a temple by the river to offer incense. He saw a 1,000-year-old cypress tree in the back hall of the temple. It would take 7 or 8 strong men to wrap their arms around it. Its shade covered half of the square. Beside the tree stood a stone tablet. It was written by a writer of the Fufu kingdom. The local government spent a lot of money to hire a famous craftsman to engrave it. Although it was a new tablet, it was full of ancient charm. After reading the inscription, he realized that this ancient cypress tree had experienced many wars. It was old, but it was still standing. Qin Pingon liked the contents of the inscription. He took down the green bamboo box and took out paper, brush, and ink. Using the bamboo box as a desk, he copied the inscription word by word. There were many inscriptions on the tablet. Qin Pingon copied them meticulously. Unknowingly, it was already night. The temple had a night ban. Not only did the temple attendant not chase people away, he even brought 2 stools with the temple attendant and placed them on the left and right sides of the tablet. They lit up lamps and helped to illuminate the tablet. The lamps were covered with gauze. It was simple but exquisite to prevent the wind from extinguishing the lamps. When Qin Pingon saw this, he quickly stopped writing and stood up. He bowed and thanked the attendant. The old temple attendant smiled and waved his hand, indicating that the guest should just focus on copying the inscription. He also said that the temple had a room for the guest to stay overnight. The old man instructed the attendant. The latter held the key in his hand and squatted down to sleep. The attendant was really bored. He stood behind the old man and watched him copy the inscription. The characters were neither good nor bad. It was just that he copied them seriously and wrote them neatly. He really couldn't see how good the characters were. He had gone to other temples to play before. Compared to his own temple, the other temples were much more beautiful. There were many inscriptions by scholars on the walls. Each one was more elegant than the last. In particular, there was a scholar who was drunk and holding a cup. He wrote an entire wall of cursive characters. It really made people's hearts sway. Although it was only a cursive inscription, it was praised by the literary circles of Fuyu as the painting of an old flood dragon spreading the rain. The characters of the young scholar in green robes in front of him weren't very good. They were very ordinary. After Qin Pingon finished copying the inscription, he packed up the bamboo box and put it back on his back. He then went to the guest house to check in. As for how to express his gratitude, after thinking it over, he could only donate some money for incense before he left tomorrow. The attendant yawned incessantly. He felt like a sleepy bug was crawling into his ears. However, he wouldn't complain that the guest was too slow. There were many stone inscriptions and inscriptions in the temple, so there were often scholars who came here to copy the inscriptions. The attendant wasn't very old, but he was very experienced. The temple attendant's grandfather also had a strange temper. He had always treated scholars with respect and special treatment. According to a few of his senior brothers in the temple attendant's grandfather had received who knew how many scholars who came to the capital to take the imperial examinations or to visit the mountains and rivers. Unfortunately, the temple's feng shui was mediocre. That was because the stances were not taught by Wang Dun in the villa. It was a rough manual that he got by chance when he was young. His master Wang Dun did not mind Lu Zhuo practicing the stances. Wang Dun had read the manual and thought it was harmless but not meaningful. Anyway, Lu Zhuo liked it, so Lu Zhuo could practice according to the manual. It turned out that Wang Dun and his senior brothers and sisters were right. However, Lu Zhuo did not think it was a waste of effort. On his way down the mountain, he saw the stooped old housekeeper standing at the bottom of the steps as if waiting for him. Lu Zhuo quickly went down the mountain. The old housekeeper looked thin and wore a long green robe. However, the old man often coughed. It seemed that he had been ill for many years and had not recovered. One of the old man's legs was slightly limping, but it was not obvious. The old man's surname was Wu and his name was Fengjia. It was an uncommon name. Except for Lu Zhuo's generation, the younger generation did not know the old man's name. From Wang Dun's first disciple Fu Lutai to Lu Zhuo and his junior brother, They all liked to call the old man Grandpa Wu. When Lu Zhuo entered the villa for the first time, the old housekeeper was already working in the villa. It was said that the old housekeeper had been working in the villa for as many years as the master of the villa was old. Lu Zhuo said softly, "Grandpa Wu, it's windy and cold at night. I'll patrol the villa." The old man waved his hand and continued to patrol with Lu Zhuo. He smiled and said, "Lu Zhuo, I have two things to tell you. You may be disappointed. Well, you will be." Lu Zhuo felt a little strange. It seemed that the old housekeeper was a little different tonight. In the past, the old man gave people the impression that he was in his twilight years and would not live for long. This actually worried Lu Zhuo. Maybe it was because Lu Zhuo had no hope of reaching the top in martial arts, so he started to think about things other than martial arts. For example, the situation of the old man in the villa in his later years, whether the children would have the opportunity to take the imperial examination, and whether the atmosphere in the villa would be more festive this year. The old man said slowly, "Lu Zhuo, you actually have the talent for cultivation. If you were lucky enough to meet a preacher in your early years, you would have a bright future. Unfortunately, you met your master Wang Dan and turned to martial arts. What a waste." Lu Zhuo smiled and was about to say something when the old man waved his hand and interrupted him. "Don't say it's okay. That's because you've never seen the demeanor of the immortals on the mountain. Qi Jinglong's state is certainly not low. You and he are just friends who met by chance in Jianghu. Qi Jinglong is a little freak who is not a scholar but is more mellow than a scholar. Therefore you don't really know about cultivation on the mountain." Lu Zhuo was speechless. Astral Qi overflowed. Within a radius of 10 feet, the grass, trees and soil were all pulverized, dust flying. The robe of the nascent soul cultivator in the old man's hand gave off a series of fine ripping sounds. Yu casually flicked his finger. His forehead was pierced by a strand of astral qi. An assassin of Deer Cutting Mountain who was purely a martial cultivator died on the spot. The golden body stage martial cultivator died just like that. Guyu said indifferently, "The heart is still the heart. The great commotion in my ears is like the sound of a drum, it is a bit noisy." That nascent soul cultivator was already unable to speak, he could only use the heart lake rippling language to say, "Elder Gu, once you kill the 6 of us, even if your fist technique is divine, you can protect that young man for a while but you cannot protect him forever. My Deer Cutting Mountain does not have a fixed peak. The cultivators of all places are drifting. Elder Gu can of course pursue and kill as you wish. No one can stop Elder from punching. If Elder meets one, then one will die. But in this period of time, as long as that young man does not follow Elder, even if it is only for a few days, he will definitely die. I can guarantee it." Guyu asked, "A Deer Cutting Mountain that scurries across the street can threaten me? Who gave you the guts? Jiyu of Ape Crying Mountain?" The nascent soul cultivator said with a bitter smile, "Elder Gu, I am only stating a fact." Guyu thought for a moment. "It is very simple, I will spread the word and agree to fight with Jiyu at Jolly Mountain. Before that, Jiyu must exterminate Deer Cutting Mountain, give him a year's time limit. Jiyu's disciples and grand-disciples at Ape Crying Mountain will definitely be very happy to be able to play a game of cat and mouse with you." The nascent soul cultivator's expression changed slightly. "Elder Gu, we really did not break the rules by gathering together this time. The previous assassination failed, it is already over. This is the unshakable rule of Deer Cutting Mountain. As for why we have come, forgive me for not being able to reveal the secret. This is the rule of Deer Cutting Mountain. I hope Elder can understand." Guyu asked a question, "If I meet you on the way, will I kill you with one punch?" The nascent soul cultivator did not know why this Realm 10 martial artist would ask such a question. He could only answer honestly, "Of course not." Guyu asked again, You are now telling me that Deer Cutting Mountain has rules and you hope that I will abide by them, then why do you not care about my rules? The opponent is someone that I have punched but did not kill, you know my identity, you are not even willing to endure for a few days? Do you want me to stand here and tell you the rules? Are the rules that you can understand? Guyu laughed. That's strange, since when did my rules give you brats the confidence to not abide by them? The little guy said angrily, so many words? I want something smaller and more imposing. Gukin said, oh. The young man sharpens his knife at night. If you want to say something against me, you'll die immediately. The little guy frowned. The murderous aura is too strong. I'm afraid of being hit. But it's not that I can't say it. I can only say it to those who can't outrun me. Gukin laughed and slapped the little guy's head. You're so clever. You're like me when I was young. Gukin stopped laughing and said, forget about what you just said. Let me teach you something else. It's even bolder. The little guy nodded vigorously. Hurry up. Gukin said seriously, it's cold on the bed every day. The little guy flew into a rage out of humiliation and slapped the man's shoulder. You're the one who wets the bed. Gukin suddenly asked doubtfully, oh right, the teacher won't hit you? Don't you often go home crying? You said that the old teacher is an old bastard who likes to beat you with a board the most? The little guy shook his shoulders and said with a smile, you don't know this. Our school has a new teacher. The previous one was annoying. He never hit or scolded those who were good at studying. He only stared at us who were bad at studying and beat us to death. It was as if we stole something from him. I want to grow up and not be a naive child anymore. Once I have some strength, I'll secretly beat him up. The new one is very good. He never hits anyone and doesn't care about us. It's really a comfortable life now. Gukin smiled. Then you prefer the current teacher? The little fellow was stunned for a moment. Mr. Gu, did you hit your head on the door when you went out today? Why do you always ask such stupid questions? If you went to the school to study, wouldn't you like the new teacher? Now, no matter how much trouble we make, as long as we don't disturb those obedient students, the new teacher never cares. Not to mention beating us, he won't even scold us. It's very good. Gukin continued to lean back and said with a smile, can a teacher who only cares about the students be considered a good teacher? Then what does a teacher need to do in this world? The little fellow sighed. You with the surname Gu, your brain is really damaged. Actually, I used to want you and my sister to be good. Now forget it. I'm not very promising in my studies. If brother-in-law doesn't live up to expectations in the future, what will I do in the future? Gukin smiled and said, how do you know that you're not promising in your studies? I think you're quite smart. The little guy drooped his head. It's not just the new teacher. The old teacher also said that I'm so stubborn that I can only be useless for the rest of my life. Every time the old teacher scolded me, he would hit my palm with the ruler. I hate him the most. Gu Can rubbed the little guy's head. When you grow up, if you meet those two teachers on the street, you can ignore the new teacher. After all, he's only working for money and isn't considered a teacher. That is why the virtuous saints separated the heavens and earth. Those who do not appreciate their fortune are not fools. In fact, almost all of us are no exception. Xianxia walked slowly. Now the common people of the world talk about the gods of the mountains and rivers, flower demons, wood demons, monsters, ghosts, and Yin spirits. What are they? They are places far away in the heavens in the netherworld. They are mountains and lakes where few people go. Even those who are close to the human world and coexist with us are still bound by incomparably complicated rules. That is why they say that the places where demons are sneaking around are the places where heavenly masters use their swords. In the streets, there are peach talismans, door gods, and ancestral temples with incense. We can go to the temples and Daoist temples to pray for blessings and dispel disasters. We can go to the mountains to visit immortals and have all kinds of opportunities. Xianxia stopped and looked around. He picked up the willow hoop and casually threw it into the lake. Then if one day we humans, no matter if we are mortals or cultivators, have no choice but to switch places with them, what kind of situation will we be in? Are you afraid? I Xianxia am afraid. Lu Laoqing said, I won't think about this. Xianxia nodded. It's okay. Because someone will think about it. So you and Lu Zhimao can have peace and quiet and cultivate your own Dao. Because even if the world turns upside down, you can still avoid death. If your realm is high enough, you will have a way to retreat and live. Lu Laoqing frowned. Xianxia smiled and asked, but what if all the cultivators on the mountain peak think like you, Lu Laoqing? Lu Laoqing shook his head. They won't. Xianxia scratched his head and sighed. So this is the most fun part. Everything is good, we see it as a matter of course. We don't need to talk about it or think about it. As for the bad, we can grit our teeth and think about it for a long time. Lu Laoqing was a little confused. He didn't know why this master was telling him this. Xianxia had already changed the topic. He was relaxed and no longer had the strange emotions from before. His footsteps were light. In the Jianghu romance, the friends of the heroes are all good people and good deeds. Even if they die for a reason. In the supernatural stories, people's hearts fluctuate and ghosts run amok. In the end, good and evil will be rewarded. Lu Laoqing, do you read these miscellaneous books? Lu Laoqing shook his head. Never. Xianxia smiled. That's why you should read more books. Lu Laoqing knew that this master was joking. Naturally, he didn't take it seriously. This master was very bored every day. Outside of cultivation, he would cast camouflage arts and wander around the 4 major cities by the book Slip Lake. Every time he returned, he would buy some toys for the child that Sword Immortal Hu Kai carried. Xianxia could spend a lot of time playing with the child and teaching him how to walk. Sometimes Lu Laoqing would feel depressed. Was it Xianxia's unfathomable personality that allowed him to climb step by step to his current position? Or was it after he climbed to the top that his personality gradually changed and he became the master of the true state sect today? Xianxia walked to a ferry. Before Lu Zhimao went into seclusion, he asked me for the old territories of Green Gorge Island and White Scale Island. He planned to give them to his disciple, Gu Can. Because he didn't know that I specially gave the territory near Cloud Tower City to Gu Can. However, that young man, Gu Can, after hearing about this, actually dared to accept it at such a young age. It's true that the coward starves to death and the bold bloats to death. However, it's only a matter of time and it might not take too long. Decades? 60 years. It'll become you, Lu Laoqing. Even if you stand at the peak of Gong Willow Island, you'll still feel that you're a head shorter than that person standing here at the ferry. Lu Laoqing said, I've learned something. Zhang Xianxia laughed. As expected, the words of an immortal are more pleasant to the ears. So you have to study hard and I have to cultivate hard. Lu Laoqing sighed. Zhang Xianxia said without reason, perhaps one day, I'll return to Tongyi continent to oversee Jade Grey sect. Then you'll be the next sect master of True Realm sect. As for Lu Jimao, you can suppress him at the bottleneck of unrefined Jade Grey sect, so that he won't even have the courage to break through to Immortal realm. If you're in a good mood at that time and feel that he's no longer a threat to you, you can be magnanimous and let him ascend to Immortal realm. Then he can go and establish a subsidiary sect of Aquarius Continent's True Realm sect. Zhang Xianxia covered his sleeves with both hands. I'm not painting a pie in the sky for you, Lu Laoqing. I, Zhang Xianxia, am not that despicable. Lu Laoqing seemed to understand something. Currently, True Realm sect had people who specialized in collecting all the mountains and rivers of Tongyi continent. Among them, there were rumors that the sect master of Jade Grey sect, the #1 immortal sect in Tongyi continent, might be in seclusion. He was pursuing the mysterious ascendant realm. Lu Laoqing was actually not unfamiliar with the old sect master Sun Yuan. After all, they had traveled a long distance to Aquarius continent. In fact, Lu Laoqing was the True Realm sect's worshipper that Sun Yuan had appointed. However, to Zhang Xianxia this little bit of incense was worth nothing. Lu Laoqing took a deep breath. He felt that the world was vast and it was rare for him to have such great ambitions. He nodded and said in a low voice, then from now on I, Lu Laoqing, can sincerely risk my life for my True Realm sect. Zhang Xianxia turned his head and patted Lu Laoqing's shoulder lightly. We're family, don't be so courteous. I've said some harsh words earlier. Brother Lu, please don't mind. Lu Laoqing hesitated for a moment. Zhang Xianxia said, we're family, of course you can say some harsh words. If you don't mind, I don't have anything to worry about. The only thing I worry about is having too much money. Lu Laoqing said with a straight face, Sect Master Zhang, why are you asking for a beating? Zhang Xianxia rubbed his cheeks. After thinking for a while, he suddenly realized, it's probably because you're not a woman. On the side of Qingluan, there was a handsome young man in white robes. He brought an old man and a young man to tour half of the country's territory. The wandering storytellers and the shopkeepers of private bookstores began to take turns. Of course, there was also a group of royal literati that Li Baozhen had privately recruited. They began to bitterly and speak up for justice. In the end, one by one their reputation would be ruined. Would the common people who had unknowingly added fuel to the fire really care about the truth? Maybe they would, but not many. Most of them were just there to watch the fun. Just like what Lu Qingfeng was doing today, watching the fun from afar. Why should he look at the people who were just there to watch the fun and let them think too much? Lu Qingfeng wouldn't. Moreover, there was never a fun that didn't end. After the hubbub there was dead silence. It had always been like this. Lu Qingfeng smiled and said to himself, I've made a good start. What was more, Li Baozhen was very smart. It was easy for him to draw inferences. Lu Qingfeng suddenly stopped and said to the boy beside him, Lu Mang, remember, if one day in the future no matter who comes to persuade you to harm me, whether it's a long-term hidden chess piece or a hasty assassination, you just have to nod and agree. Not only do you agree, but you also have to do your best. You don't need to hesitate or show mercy. The young attendant's face was pale. His mind was blank. He didn't understand why his master said such frightening words. Lu Qingfeng looked as usual and said softly, because you definitely can't succeed. In fact, I'm harming you once by keeping you by my side, so I have to save you once. So that you won't die in vain for the so-called morality. During this period, how much you can learn from me, how much you can accumulate contacts, and where you eventually climb to is all your own ability. As for why I keep you by my side knowing this, it's because I want to know if you can become the second Li Baozhen and be smarter than him. So smart that you can really benefit the world in the end. The young attendant's face was covered in tears. He was frightened by this unfamiliar master. Lu Qingfeng asked softly, "Do you remember?" The young attendant wiped his tears and nodded. Lu Qingfeng smiled. "Very good, then from now on you have to try to forget all of this. Otherwise you won't be able to fool Li Baozhen." After a while, Lu Qingfeng had a rare moment of surprise. Because a white-robed young man was walking towards him, but the personal retainer that Dolly had sent to him did not appear from start to finish. The young man was holding a kite in his hand, smiling brightly. "Lu Qingfeng, I'm carrying a small hoe, I'm here to poach my own people. You're following that old bastard, there's no future for you, follow me Cui Dongshan. What's more, what's mine is mine and what's his is still mine, there's no need to be polite with him. In the entire southern part of the Aquarius continent I'm the biggest, that old bastard can't do anything about it."